Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I set up the time-lapse on a Tuesday night in mid-September. Skies were clear, no moon, pretty ideal for stargazing. I was out behind my place in Driftwood, Texas, kind of a scrubby hilltop that backs up to some ranch land. There's not a ton of light pollution if you face away from Austin, and I built a little platform out there with a level mount and power for my gear. I'd just gotten a new camera, a ZWO ASI 533, and I wanted to test it on a longer sequence, something like 6 hours. I mounted it on my Skywatcher tracker and pointed it towards Cygnus. I wasn't trying to catch anything in particular, just wanted to see how the noise looked on the sensor over time. Everything was routine. I calibrated the mount, triple-checked polar alignment, locked down the intervalometer to shoot one frame every 15 seconds. Started the sequence at around 8:20 p.m. and left it running through the night. Next morning, I woke up around 6 and went out to bring the gear in. Nothing seemed off. I dumped the images onto my desktop and let them compile into a time-lapse while I made coffee. I wasn't even planning on watching the full thing, just skipping around to check for clouds or motion blur. I started scrubbing through it around 8 a.m., just a standard star field. The Milky Way drifted slowly across the frame, satellites here and there, a couple of faint meteors. But then I noticed something strange. There was a single point of light, bright, steady, not blinking, just above the frame's bottom right corner in the first few minutes. At first, I assumed it was Jupiter or maybe Vega peeking in, but as the frames progressed, that point didn't follow the rest of the sky. Everything else moved left to right, as expected with the Earth's rotation. But this one, it moved the other way. Not fast, really slow. Like, if I hadn't had it sped up 200x, I wouldn't have noticed at all. But frame to frame, it was drifting against the starfield, just a hair at a time. I thought it might be a plane, but it didn't blink. No strobe, no color shift, no tail, and it stayed in frame for almost 40 minutes. That's way too long for a plane, or even a satellite on a weird orbit. I backed up and watched again, slower this time. You could see it make these tiny directional changes, not enough to jump, just a subtle wobble, like it was correcting itself. The path wasn't perfectly smooth. About halfway through the sequence, the object stopped moving entirely, just sat in one spot for maybe 8 minutes. No fade, no blinking, no shift. Then it started drifting again, same speed but at a slightly different angle. I checked the tracking logs from the mount. It was running perfectly. No skips, no errors. If the mount had misaligned or stalled, the whole frame would have shifted. But all the stars stayed solid, which means the tracker was working fine. The rest of the footage was normal. Around 2:10 a.m., the point of light exited the top left of the frame, and that was it. I exported a clip of just that portion around 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. and played it again. This time, I noticed something else. At about 12:34 a.m., the object dimmed for a few seconds. Not flickered, dimmed, like someone turned down a dimmer switch and then brought it back up. The background stars didn't change at all, so it wasn't the atmosphere. I froze the frame where it was dimmest. It wasn't totally dark, still faintly visible, but it had dropped way below everything else in the scene. Then it slowly brightened back to its original intensity, steady as before. I zoomed in as far as the resolution allowed. Still just a point. No shape, no halo, just a pure white pixel. I checked the sky databases next, Starlink paths, ISS passes, Iridium flares. Nothing matched the location or time. It wasn't in any cataloged flight path or satellite log for that night. Then I went back to my raw images, the individual frames. I found the exact ones where the dimming happened and looked closer. Around that time, something strange happened to the image noise. Every photo in the sequence had a little thermal grain, typical for long exposures. But for exactly 3 frames during that dim period, the background noise changed. The stars got fuzzier. Not out of focus, just softer, like the whole scene had been slightly diffused. After those 3 frames, everything snapped back to normal. I thought maybe dew had formed on the lens, but I checked the dew heater logs. Temps were steady, no condensation warnings. Also, the stars were sharp before and after, so it didn't track. I decided to do a screen recording of the whole time lapse and send it to a friend of mine, Kyle, who does astrophotography out in Arizona. I didn't give him any context, just told him to watch and tell me if he saw anything weird. He called me about 2 hours later and asked, "What the hell is that point of light doing?" So it wasn't just me. We both tried running the footage through different filters, contrast boosts, exposure curves, color isolations. Nothing changed what we were seeing. Still just that white point slowly drifting in the wrong direction, changing course once, dimming briefly, and then exiting frame. We even checked for bugs, maybe some weird sensor artifact, stuck pixel, something digital, but it changed position, brightness, and path over time. No way it was just a glitch. Out of curiosity, I checked my backup drive. It auto-logs time metadata from the mount and camera. Everything lined up except for one thing. There was a gap in the log between 1:20 and 54 a.m. 46 seconds, just gone. The camera kept shooting through it, and those frames are there, but the control software didn't record any settings or positional data for that window. Like, it just skipped over that period entirely. I hadn't touched anything. I was asleep. I've done maybe 200 overnight sequences out there. That's never happened. I didn't know what else to do with the footage. I didn't want to post it anywhere public. Just kept it on my drive, checked it a few more times over the next week. Every time I came away with the same feeling, like I was looking at something I wasn't supposed to notice. I haven't caught anything like it since, but I still run the camera a few times a month. Just in case. I was out checking the south pasture around 4:30 in the morning. That was August, about 2 years back. Hot spell during the day, but that morning was cool. Low 60s maybe. There was fog hugging the ground, real light but thick enough to dull the headlights. I'd woken up to the motion sensor light going off by the barn, which usually means raccoons or a stray dog nosing around, but figured I'd drive the quad out anyway, since I hadn't been out there since the afternoon before. We've got 80 acres just west of Macomb, Illinois. The south pasture backs up against a tree line with a shallow creek running through. Cows usually don't wander that far at night unless they're spooked or trying to avoid bugs. But when I got close to the gate, I saw none of them were near the barn or the feed trough. That was odd, since we dropped fresh hay the evening before. I figured coyotes, maybe. It happens, so I drove down the fence line slow, trying not to spook anything if it was something big. I didn't hear anything though. No barking, no movement, just the hum of the quad and the tires crunching over the dry grass. When I reached the rise near the west side of the pasture, I killed the engine. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. Too quiet. No crickets, no frogs, not even wind in the trees. I sat there for a second listening. That's when I saw them. The cows. They were all grouped in the very back corner of the pasture, right up against the fence line where it turns toward the creek. Maybe 50 of them, all bunched together like a pack. That's not normal. They space themselves out usually. Even when they bed down for the night, they don't clump like that unless they're frightened. And every single one of them was facing the same way, south, toward the trees. I didn't get it at first. I thought maybe there was a dog or something in the woods, but then I saw something through the fog, a light. It wasn't bright, just a glow hanging maybe 10 or 12 feet above the ground, dead still. Soft, white blue, not pulsing or flickering, just steady, not big either. Size of a beach ball maybe, but it wasn't lighting anything around it. The trees should have had shadows or something, but they didn't. I reached down for the flashlight in the footwell, and when I looked back up, the light was gone. Just gone. No sound, no movement, just not there anymore. That's when the cows started shifting. Not panicking, not running, just turning their heads toward me, like they all noticed me at the same time. It made me freeze. I wasn't scared exactly, just weirded out. Like I'd interrupted something. I called out, "Hey!" just to break the silence. A few of them moved back, normal-like. So I climbed off the quad and walked down toward them. When I got about halfway across the pasture, maybe 60 yards from where they were standing, I noticed the fog felt thicker, but only around that area. Everywhere else it stayed light and low, but the air by the fence line looked hazy, like heat shimmer but cooler. I could feel it on my skin too, like the air had changed somehow, denser. The ground felt strange under my boots, not wet, not soft, just different. I can't explain that part right, like stepping on packed snow, but dry. The cows didn't budge when I got close. They weren't acting skittish anymore, just quiet, calm. A few blinked slow at me, but none of them turned around or wandered off. That's when I saw the light again. Not directly. It was in the corner of my eye, just off past the tree line. If I looked at it, it wasn't there. But every time I turned away, there it was, floating. I tried a few times, turning my head quick to catch it, but it vanished every time I faced it. It felt like it knew when I was looking. I stood there for maybe a minute, not moving. I could hear my breathing, that's how quiet everything was. Then, without warning, every cow turned and started walking back toward the barn. All at once, like someone had flipped a switch. Slow, steady steps, heads down, no noise. The fog started to lift right after that. Not blow away, lift, like it was evaporating from the ground up. I stood there a while longer, waiting to see if the light would come back, but it didn't. I eventually walked back to the quad and rode up to the barn. The cows had already gathered by the trough like nothing happened. Ate fine. No signs of stress. Later that morning, I checked the corner of the field where they'd been standing. Nothing unusual. No prints except cow tracks. No scorch marks, no branches broken near the fence line. The ground felt normal again. I even took my dog, Lila, down there in the afternoon. She sniffed around, but didn't act nervous or anything. I didn't tell my wife about it until a couple days later. She just raised her eyebrows and said, "Maybe I saw headlights through the fog." But we're 10 miles from the nearest highway. There's no road out there, just the creek and woods. I tried to forget about it. But the next week, when I was fixing a loose gate hinge, I noticed one of the metal fence posts in that corner had a faint discoloration, like something had heated it unevenly. Not rust, not soot, just this faint blue-silver tint that didn't match any of the others. I scrubbed at it and it didn't come off. I left it alone after that. Whatever happened that night, I didn't want to mess with it. We'd started the hike around 10 in the morning. It was supposed to be just a day trip. Me, Jason, Liz, and Mark. We parked off a dirt road outside of Newberry Springs and followed a trail Jason had marked on his GPS. It was barely a path, just old BLM land he said he'd explored once before. Nothing official. No shade, just sun-baked rocks and dry washes winding through low hills. Classic Mojave. We packed light. Just water, jerky, a couple Cliff Bars each. Mark brought a beat-up Nikon and Liz had her little drone. I was just happy to get out of the city for a day. It was hot as hell by noon. No wind, barely any sound besides our boots crunching and the occasional buzzing fly. We'd passed a rusted-out shell of a truck, probably from the 60s, sitting half buried in the sand. Liz took a few pictures. Jason joked that it looked like it had just been dropped there from the sky. By the time we hit the ridge Jason wanted to reach, the sun was dropping low, maybe 5:30. We sat for a bit, shared what was left of the food, and watched the hills go dark. I remember looking at my phone around 6. I had no service, but the GPS was still working. I'd marked our truck on the map and figured we had enough daylight to head back before it got tricky. That's when we saw the light. At first it looked like a star, except too low and too bright. It wasn't blinking like a plane, and it was dead silent, just hovering there, maybe 100 feet up, no shape, just this pale white orb. It didn't flicker, just sat in the sky above the wash. Nobody said anything right away. I think we were all just staring at it, trying to make it fit into something normal. Then it started moving, slow, smooth, like it was gliding without any resistance. It drifted over the ridge, then stopped again. Still no sound, not even the hum you get from a drone or chopper. Liz pulled out her phone to film it, held it up, and cursed. "It's dead," she said. "I had 60% like 20 minutes ago." I checked mine. Screen was black, wouldn't even boot. Jason's too. Mark's camera wouldn't turn on either, even though he'd barely used it. We stood there for another minute, watching this thing hover. It started moving again, faster this time, then blinked out. Just gone. Not behind a cloud, not fading, just there 1 second and gone the next. That's the last thing I remember clearly. The next thing I knew, we were walking, heading downhill. Jason was in front, Liz and Mark behind. I remember thinking it was darker than it should have been, like we'd missed sunset completely. I pulled out my phone again, and this time it lit up. 8:12 p.m. Battery back at 47%. The trail on the GPS showed we were way off course, like we'd veered half a mile south without realizing it. I stopped and asked, "Does anyone remember the last hour?" Jason turned around. "What do you mean?" "After the light disappeared," I said. "We didn't start walking right away, did we?" Mark looked confused. "I thought we did." "No," Liz said. "We stood there for a while, didn't we?" Nobody could agree on how long we'd been standing on that ridge. No one remembered packing up or deciding to head back, and none of us remembered the sun going down. We argued about it for a bit, then decided to just keep moving. The truck wasn't far, and none of us liked the idea of being out there any longer than necessary. We made it back just after 9. The air felt heavy, still hot, but with this weird static in it, like before a thunderstorm, except there weren't any clouds. When we got to the truck, the first thing I noticed was that the clock on the dash was blinking. Jason's battery had died, apparently, though the dome light still worked. He swore it had been fine that morning. We jump-started it using Mark's jumper pack and got out of there fast. Later that night, I checked the GPS history on my phone. It showed a gap between 6:08 and 7:55. The trail line just stopped, then picked up again further down the ridge, already headed back toward the road. I checked the health data too, steps, elevation, all of it, and it was like we hadn't moved at all during that time. No movement, no heart rate spikes, nothing. Liz swore up and down she'd filmed the light before her phone died, but there was no video. Just a corrupted file labeled DCIM 11123, wouldn't open. Mark's camera had one photo that was just a white blur. He didn't remember taking it. We all met up 2 days later at a diner in Barstow to compare notes. Everyone felt weird. Not sick, exactly, just tired and off, like we hadn't really rested since the hike. Jason said he kept hearing this high-pitched hum at night. Liz's smartwatch wouldn't sync with her phone anymore. Mark started having nosebleeds, which he never used to get. And I kept waking up at exactly 2:17 a.m. every night for a week. Eventually things went back to normal. Phones worked, cameras worked, we all stopped talking about it. Not because we forgot, just because we didn't know what to say. I've done plenty of hikes since then, but I haven't been back to the Mojave. None of us have. And I was out in the field behind my house one late Sunday afternoon in early October, flying my drone. It's something I'd gotten into about 6 months before, just a hobby to clear my head after work. My name's Jake, by the way. I live in a quiet suburb outside of Boise, Idaho, surrounded by open fields and patches of woods, so it's a pretty good spot for flying. Not too many people, and plenty of space to maneuver without bothering anyone. That day, the sky was mostly clear with some scattered clouds, and a light breeze was coming in from the west. Perfect flying weather. I'd taken my usual route, just flying straight up, then out over the field, doing some slow circles and taking pictures of the landscape. I had my tablet with me, the live feed showing exactly what the drone's camera saw. At some point, I decided to try going higher, near the legal altitude limit of 400 feet. The drone's app warns you when you're getting close to that cap, and it won't let you go any higher. So I took it up, watching the trees get smaller and the roads look like lines on a map. It's weird how peaceful it feels up there, away from everything. Anyway, after about 20 minutes of flying, I started bringing the drone back in. As I was reviewing the live feed on my tablet, I noticed something odd. There was this dark shape moving alongside the drone, sort of hovering nearby, matching its speed and direction. At first, I thought it might be a bird, but it didn't flap wings or make any noise, and the shape was too vague, almost like a shadow. I stopped the drone's movement to get a better look. The shadow stayed there, just floating next to the drone. I tried moving the drone left and right, but the shadow shifted with it. It wasn't something on the lens or a glitch. The shadow had a definite shape, almost like a rounded, uneven silhouette. It reminded me of one of those big bats I'd seen in documentaries, but we don't have bats that big around here. I started to feel a little uneasy. The drone's altitude showed 390 feet, just under the limit. No way anything that big was up that high, at least not anything I knew about. I thought maybe a cloud or some atmospheric effect was messing with the camera, so I zoomed out a bit and tilted the camera angle down to see if anything on the ground might be casting a strange shadow, but everything looked normal. Just the open field, some distant houses, and the highway. I decided to land the drone, but as I brought it in, the shadow didn't move closer or away. It stayed right beside the drone, as if it was following it precisely. When the drone touched down, the shadow vanished instantly. I sat there for a minute, staring at the screen, wondering if I'd imagined it or if it was some sort of interference. Later that evening, after dinner, I downloaded the footage to my laptop to look at it more closely. On the original video files, the shadow was there the whole time the drone was at high altitude. I watched frame by frame, and it wasn't a lens flare or an artifact. It had depth, a shape, and even seemed to block some of the sunlight, casting a faint shadow on the drone's camera feed. The next day, I took the drone back out, trying to recreate the conditions. Same field, same time of day, same altitude. I flew the drone up again, watching carefully for the shadow. Nothing appeared. I flew the drone a bit longer, over the woods this time, and still no sign of anything strange. I asked my friend Miguel, who's a drone enthusiast too, to check the footage with me. He's pretty tech-savvy and familiar with glitches and camera problems. We looked at the video on his computer, slowed it down, enhanced contrast and brightness. The shadow was still there, clear and moving with the drone. He agreed it wasn't a typical glitch. Miguel joked, "Maybe you found yourself a UFO shadow." I laughed it off, but honestly, I didn't know what else to say. After that, I kept an eye on the skies for a few nights from my backyard, just looking up at the stars, hoping maybe I'd see something else. Nothing. Just the usual planes, satellites, and an occasional meteor. But every time I watch that footage, the image of that dark shape beside my drone sticks with me. Something was up there that day. Something following or shadowing the drone at an altitude where no bird or regular object should be. I don't fly the drone quite as high anymore, not because I'm scared, but because I don't want to see that shadow again. I'm still not sure what it was, and part of me hopes I never do. I'd been messing around with my ham radio setup one late Saturday night, just trying to get a better handle on the whole thing. My name's Mark, and I live out near Flagstaff, Arizona, which, for the record, is one of those spots where the sky is so dark at night it feels like space is right on top of you. Perfect for radio and stargazing, but also, as I'd learned, for some weird stuff you can't quite explain. I'd just finished dinner and was sitting at my workbench in the garage. The radio gear is all pretty old school, nothing fancy, mostly stuff I pieced together over the years, antennas I built myself, and a couple of receivers. I'm not a pro by any means, just a guy who likes the quiet and the challenge of picking up signals. I usually listen to weather stations or chat with folks in nearby states, but that night I decided to try scanning some of the higher frequencies, the kind that don't get a lot of traffic. After tuning for maybe an hour, I caught something strange. It wasn't a normal signal like Morse code or any of the standard digital transmissions I'm used to. Instead, it was a rhythmic pulse, steady, almost like a heartbeat, but mechanical and deliberate. Not random static or interference either. It repeated in a pattern that was close to Morse code, but off enough that I couldn't make sense of it. I leaned closer, adjusting the squelch and fine-tuning the receiver. The pulses kept coming, steady and persistent. I grabbed my logbook and started noting the times and signal strength. Something about it felt oddly deliberate, like it was trying to communicate but not in any language I recognized. I decided to figure out where it was coming from. Using the directional antenna I'd built, I began a slow sweep, turning it in small increments and watching the signal strength meter. The pulse got stronger as I turned the antenna toward the southern sky, then southwest, then straight up. That's when I stopped and sat back. The strongest signal wasn't coming from any terrestrial source, it was coming from directly overhead, I repeated the sweep a few times, triple checking my setup. Same result every time. The pulses were strongest when my antenna pointed straight up, as if the signal was coming from something above the atmosphere. That didn't make sense. I mean, I've heard plenty of stories about signals from space, but nothing that came through on my kind of equipment like this. I even tried changing bands and frequencies, but the pulse was only on one particular frequency, one I hadn't seen used before. I called my buddy Jerry. He's a fellow ham operator, lives a few miles down the road. Told him what I was hearing and what I'd found. He was skeptical, said it was probably interference from a satellite or some weather balloon. But neither of us could explain why the pulse was so rhythmic or why it wasn't any familiar code. We agreed to meet the next night with our gear and try to pinpoint it together. That evening, the sky was clear, crisp, with a light wind that made the desert scrub rustle softly. Jerry showed up with his setup, a more powerful receiver and a notebook filled with charts and frequencies. We set up on my back patio, away from the house lights. We tuned in. The pulses were there, as steady as ever. Jerry aimed his antenna upward and the signal peaked. I adjusted mine to the same angle, and we both confirmed it was strongest directly above us. Jerry joked about aliens, but his usual smirk wasn't quite there. There was a weird silence between us, like the night was holding its breath. After a while, I noticed something else. The pulses weren't perfectly consistent. They'd speed up and slow down slightly, like a breathing rhythm. It wasn't just mechanical, it felt organic. We spent hours tracking it, and during that time I kept glancing at the sky. No aircraft, no satellites in sight, no flashing lights or anything moving. Then around 2 a.m. something shifted. The pulses faded, then stopped entirely. I looked up and I swear the stars seemed brighter, sharper, but something was off. The air felt thicker. There was a low hum, almost too quiet to notice, but it was definitely there. Jerry got up and stretched. He said maybe the source moved on or the signal stopped for a break. I wasn't so sure. As we packed up, I saw a faint glow near the horizon, pale and bluish, hovering low above the distant mountains. It wasn't a plane or a weather balloon. It was too steady and low, like a spotlight from some invisible machine. We didn't say anything about it at first. Jerry just nodded and said maybe it was a power station or a flare. I wasn't convinced. That night, I couldn't sleep. The signal, the glow, the hum, it all kept cycling in my head. I kept wondering if I'd heard something not meant for me, or if something was watching us through the radio waves. Over the next few days, I tried listening again. The pulses never came back. The sky was normal. The glow didn't show up again. I checked all the usual sources. Local airports, government stations, space agency updates. Nothing matched what I'd heard or seen. Sometimes when the night is quiet and I'm alone in the garage with my radio gear, I catch myself staring at the antenna pointed at the sky, waiting for the pulse to return. And it hasn't, but I still wonder what was up there that night, making those strange rhythms just for a little while, high above my head, out of reach. I was driving back home from Denver to Boise, just trying to get through the long haul in one go. It was late October, so the nights were chilly and the roads pretty empty. I had been behind the wheel for maybe 10 hours straight, and around midnight, somewhere near Twin Falls, Idaho, I started feeling it. The kind of exhaustion that just sneaks up and messes with your focus. So I figured I'd pull off at this small rest stop just off the highway to catch a few hours of sleep before finishing the drive in the morning. The rest stop was one of those bare bones places, just a gravel lot, a single porta potty, and some picnic tables under a couple of skeletal trees. I parked my old sedan facing the highway, shut the engine off, and leaned the seat back. I set my phone alarm for 5 a.m., thinking 5 hours would be enough to get me refreshed. When I woke up, I had this odd, heavy feeling, like I'd slept, but not really rested. It was still dark outside, but just barely. The sky had a faint glow from the coming dawn. I checked the clock on the dashboard. It read 5:10 a.m., right about when I expected to be waking up. That's when I noticed the gas gauge. It was sitting dead on empty. That couldn't be right. I'd filled up at a station maybe 50 miles back, and I was careful with gas. My car wasn't a gas guzzler, and the tank was half full when I pulled over. How could it be empty now? I glanced at the odometer. The mileage read 202,354. I swear to myself, I had 202,351 when I parked. 2.3 miles had been added. I frowned and rubbed my eyes, sitting up straighter. There was no way I'd driven any distance while asleep, and the car hadn't moved from where I left it. The gravel was still intact under the tires, no tracks or signs I'd rolled forward or backward. I stepped out to look around, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. The rest stop was still mostly dark except for the faint amber glow from the highway lights. I looked down the highway in both directions. No cars had stopped or passed in the last few hours. Too quiet. Even the wind was calm. I glanced at the gas cap again. It was tightly sealed, no leaks or damage. The smell of gasoline was faint but definitely there, like something had drained the tank. I went back inside the car, grabbed my phone, and tried calling my wife Sarah. No signal. That was weird too. This stretch of highway usually had at least some bars. I figured the area's just a dead zone though. I decided to check the Maps app, thinking maybe I'd accidentally driven somewhere and lost time. But the map was stuck on my location, which matched the rest stop exactly. I was starting to get that sinking feeling like something was off beyond just the gas. I tried to remember what I was dreaming about before I woke up, but my mind was fuzzy. It was like a blank patch with only fragments. A soft blue light, quiet whispers I couldn't make out, and this overwhelming sense of being watched. I shook my head, probably just tired. Maybe I dozed off for a while and someone drained my gas, or maybe there was a leak I hadn't noticed. Still, the mileage difference was the thing that stuck with me. I stayed at the rest stop, thinking about what to do next. It was too early to try calling a tow or roadside service, and with no cell signal, that wasn't an option anyway. I figured I'd wait a bit, see if anyone else came along. That's when I noticed the sounds. Not the usual hum of the highway or the occasional wind through the trees, but something else. Very faint and distant, like a low vibration under the earth. It wasn't constant. It would pulse for a few seconds, then fade away. I tried to pinpoint where it was coming from, but it felt like it was everywhere at once. It didn't make any sense. The ground near the rest stop felt solid. No construction or trains or anything that might explain it. I sat in my car watching the dim horizon, and the strange feeling of unease started to build. I wasn't scared exactly, more like confused, like I was missing some key detail. After maybe 20 minutes, I thought I saw something moving in the distance. A small flicker of light near the trees lining the highway. It wasn't a car, no headlights or taillights, just a quick flash of pale white like a lantern or a flashlight, but it didn't move like a person walking. I got out of the car and walked toward the edge of the lot to get a better look. The light flickered again, this time closer, but still not quite visible, like it was behind a screen or mist. When I focused on it, the light vanished. I turned back toward the car, feeling the cold seep deeper into my jacket. The vibration under the ground was stronger now, a steady pulse, almost like a heartbeat. I put my hand on the hood of the car, and the metal seemed to hum with it. I decided to try the engine, to see if it would start. The car fired up, but the gas gauge still read empty. The engine sounded a little rough, like it was struggling. I gave the throttle a few revs, and the sound echoed off the empty rest stop. I sat back and looked around again. The light never came back. The vibration faded slowly until it was gone altogether. I drove off the rest stop, taking it slow. The car seemed fine except for the fuel reading. I figured I'd find a gas station soon and fill up. But when I pulled over at the first station, I checked the odometer again. The mileage had ticked up another 2 miles since I left the rest stop, even though I hadn't driven that far. And the gas tank still read empty. The gas pump struggled to fill. It took nearly 10 gallons to top off a tank I was sure was at least half full when I pulled over earlier. I paid, got back in the car, and kept going. The rest of the drive home was uneventful. No strange lights, no vibrations. My phone got signal again once I hit town. When I told Sarah about it later, she just raised her eyebrows. I didn't expect her to believe the part about the mileage or the empty tank. I didn't really believe it myself. I've thought a lot about what happened, especially that weird vibration and the light flickering near the trees. I'm not sure if it was something mechanical, some glitch with the car, or something else. The only thing I'm certain of is that I woke up feeling like I'd slept for hours in one place. But my car had apparently gone somewhere else, at least a couple of miles, without me moving it. And the gas tank was empty when it shouldn't have been. Whatever it was, it left no sign except that little patch of empty gravel and an odometer that didn't add up. I was out camping alone in the White Mountains of Arizona, about 3 hours from Phoenix. Nothing fancy, just me, my old tent, and a small camp stove. I wanted a weekend away from everything. No phone, no people, just silence and the woods. It was mid-October, so the nights were chilly but clear, perfect for stargazing if you're into that. I set up camp around 5 p.m., got a fire going, cooked some canned chili, and settled in with a book until dark. By around 9 p.m., the sky was completely clear, stars everywhere, like the kind of sky you only see out there where there's zero light pollution. I lay back on my sleeping pad, staring up at that vast, glittering sky, thinking how peaceful it was. Then around 10:30, I heard a noise. At first, I thought it was a helicopter, one of those military choppers maybe flying low and slow. The sound was low, a deep whir, kind of muffled, but definitely mechanical. I sat up and looked around. The forest was still, nothing moving, but that noise kept coming, slow, steady, almost like it was hovering nearby. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it out toward the clearing where I'd parked my car, trying to find something to point the sound at. Nothing. Then I looked up, and that's when I noticed the stars. They were gone. Not just a cloud or a patch of sky. The entire area above me was pitch black. No stars, no moonlight, nothing. It was like a giant, smooth shadow pressed right against the sky, blotting everything out. It didn't make sense because the air was clear, no fog or smoke. I called out, "Hello?" But my voice just bounced back at me. The sound was still there, that slow, mechanical hum. I shone the flashlight into the dark patch, but the beam didn't penetrate. It was just an absence of light, like looking up through a hole in the sky. I felt this weird pressure in my chest. Not panic, but like my brain was trying to figure something out that didn't fit any rules I knew. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and sat back down, keeping my eyes on the black patch. The sound shifted slightly, like it was moving, but I couldn't see anything. The trees around me were still, no wind, no rustling. I checked my watch, 10:37. I tried to stand up and get my bearings, thinking maybe I was hallucinating, or maybe my eyes were playing tricks. But then I noticed something else. The forest felt too quiet. Usually, even at night, there's some noise. Bugs, crickets, owls, anything. But here it was completely silent, except for that mechanical hum. I pulled out my phone, hoping to check the time again, or call someone, but there was no signal. No surprise out there, but it added to the isolation. After a few minutes, the hum grew louder, almost like a vibration you could feel in your chest. I started to feel restless, like I needed to get away, but my instincts were weirdly frozen. I wanted to stand, to run even, but I stayed put, watching that black patch where the stars should have been. Then, slowly, the patch started to shrink. The stars came back, one by one, like someone was turning on a dimmer switch. The hum faded out with it, disappearing completely by the time the sky looked normal again. I sat there, shaking my head, trying to make sense of it. The whole thing lasted maybe 5 or 6 minutes. I kept waiting for something to happen, but the forest remained quiet, the sky clear. I didn't sleep much after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear that hum faintly in the back of my mind. When morning came, I packed up quickly and left without breakfast. Driving home, I thought about telling someone, but who would believe it? That the stars disappeared and a helicopter-like sound came from nowhere. No one else was around. I didn't find anything unusual on my phone or radio on the drive back. Since then, I've gone camping a few times, but I've never heard that sound or seen that patch in the sky again. Sometimes I wonder if it was some kind of natural thing I don't understand, or if I just imagined it. But the way the stars vanished, that's the part that sticks with me, like something was there, just out of sight. The power cut out around 11:45 p.m. on a Thursday. That's not that unusual out here. Weather knocks it out a couple times a year, especially when the wind kicks up through the draw. But this time it wasn't windy and it hadn't stormed in days. I live in a small place outside Magdalena, New Mexico. It's about a 15-minute drive from town, up a dirt road most people wouldn't even notice unless they were trying to get lost. I rent an old trailer on a piece of land owned by a guy named Warren, who lives in the main house down the hill. There's not much around us, just hills, pinyon trees, and empty sky. That night I was reading in bed when everything just went dark. The fans stopped. The little light on the smoke detector blinked once and died. My phone was still at 40%, so I grabbed it and turned on the flashlight, figuring maybe a breaker tripped. I checked the panel outside. Everything looked fine. I walked down the hill toward Warren's place to see if he still had power, but the porch light was out and the windows were dark. The weird thing was how quiet it was. Usually when the power goes, it's quiet. No hum from the fridge, no electronics buzzing. But this was more than that. I didn't hear anything. Not the wind, not the crickets. No dogs barking in the distance, which you normally hear even at night out here. Just before I knocked on Warren's door, I stopped. There was this sound. It wasn't loud, but it was heavy, like a low-frequency hum, almost too low to pinpoint. It wasn't coming from the trailer or any machine. It felt like it was just around, like it was in the sky. It made the hair on my arms stand up. I stood there in the dirt for a while, just listening. The sound didn't pulse or change pitch. It stayed steady, almost like pressure. I knocked on Warren's door, but no one answered. I didn't want to keep banging, since he's not exactly the friendliest guy to wake up. I headed back up to my trailer, and when I crested the little ridge before my place, I saw a light in the sky. Now I know how that sounds. This wasn't some beam or disc or anything. It looked like a plane at first, just a single bright point. But it was still. Not moving, not blinking. I watched it for maybe a minute, then looked away to see if there were any others. The stars were all visible, no clouds at all, but nothing else seemed off besides that light. When I looked back, it was gone. I figured maybe it was just a plane banking away or something I misread, so I didn't think too much about it. I went back inside and tried to check the electric co-op's outage map, but the signal was dead. No data, no service. About 20 minutes later, I started hearing this distant honking. It was faint, like maybe down in town, but it didn't stop. Just one car alarm going off in the distance, then a pause, then another one. It was the pattern that got me. It wasn't all at once. It was one, then another, a few seconds later, then another. Each one a little farther away, like something was moving down the street, setting them off one by one. Magdalena isn't big. Main Street is basically 3 blocks long, with a few shops, the feed store, and a gas station. Most of the cars would have been parked along there overnight. The alarms kept going for maybe 5 minutes, always one at a time, always in order. Then silence again. No crickets, no frogs in the arroyo, not even wind through the brush. Just that low hum, still there, still vibrating in the background. I stepped out onto the porch and just stood there, phone light off, listening. That's when I saw the tree line down the ridge flicker. I don't really know how else to describe it. It wasn't a flash. It wasn't lightning. The trees themselves didn't move, but the light around them stuttered, like watching a video buffer where the brightness jumps but nothing else shifts. It happened again maybe 30 seconds later. Just a slight flicker, but it made everything look wrong for a second. The humming got louder after that. I stepped off the porch and walked toward the clearing where I keep my truck. The air felt thick. Not hot, exactly, but like everything was slightly pressurized. I had this weird sense of being watched, but not in the paranoid way. It felt like standing in a room where someone's behind you, and you know they're there before they speak. I got in the truck and tried to start it. Nothing. Lights didn't come on, no clicks, nothing. Same with the dome light. My phone still worked, but the flashlight was glitching. It kept dimming and pulsing like the battery was dying, even though it still read 33%. I turned it off. From the truck window, I could see Warren's house down the hill, and all around it, these soft glows kept blinking in and out behind the trees, like someone walking through the brush with a light cupped in their hand, but they never broke the tree line. Every few seconds, one would flash, then another, 10 yards away, then silence again. I don't know how long I sat there. maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour. The sky had that strange, low, overcast look, even though there were no clouds. It wasn't just dark, it was like the dark had weight. Then, finally, the humming faded. Not all at once. It just slowly tapered off like someone lowering the volume dial. The moment it stopped, I could hear insects again. Distant frogs. A coyote barked somewhere past the draw. The porch light on Warren's house came back on. My fridge kicked in. My fan spun up. The power was back. I tried the truck again. It turned over like normal. I stayed up until the sun rose, just sitting on the porch with a thermos of coffee and a rifle across my lap. Not because I thought I'd need it, just because I needed something to do with my hands. Next morning, I went into town to fill up on gas and get some groceries, and overheard two guys at the pump talking about the outage. One of them, Luis, runs the auto repair shop. He said the weirdest thing was how all the car alarms on Main had gone off, in order, one by one. He said the sheriff drove through afterward and didn't see a thing. No signs of break-ins, no wind, nothing. I asked if anyone else heard a humming, and he looked at me for a long second, then just said, "Yeah, like a transformer, but from everywhere." That was it. No explanation. No one came around asking questions. The electric co-op chalked it up to a substation trip, even though none of their logs showed any faults that night. I haven't seen the lights again, but I did notice, about a week later, that one of the pinyon trees on the ridge behind my trailer had a long blackened streak down its trunk. No burn smell, no ash, just this smooth, shiny mark from the top all the way to the base. It hasn't grown any needles since. I was driving west on Highway 95 about 30 miles south of Tonopah. It was just past midnight. I'd left Ely earlier that evening after a late dinner with my cousin, and I figured I'd stop in Beatty for the night. I wasn't in a rush, just didn't feel like staying over. The road was quiet, no other cars for miles, and the only light came from the dash and my high beam stretching out over the cracked blacktop. I've done that drive more times than I can count. I used to run deliveries out that way, sometimes even slept in the truck if I didn't feel like finding a room. That stretch near the test range is always kind of eerie, even when nothing weird's going on. You can drive for hours without seeing a gas station, and the desert feels empty in a way that's hard to explain. Anyway, I was sipping from a warm bottle of water, half listening to some old AM station fuzzing in and out, when I noticed the lights. 3 of them, almost straight ahead in the sky, maybe 30 degrees up. They were small, bright white points, but clearer than stars. I figured they were aircraft at first, flying in some kind of formation. That wouldn't have been unusual out there with all the military stuff nearby. They moved slowly. Perfect triangle, equidistant. I kept expecting one to blink or bank, or for there to be engine noise, but there was nothing. No sound, and they didn't flash, just solid white. I turned the radio off and cracked the window, trying to hear anything. Wind, jets, rotor blades. But there was nothing except the tires on pavement. The odd thing was how steady they were. Commercial planes usually drift a little or wobble in formation. These didn't. They held the exact spacing for at least 5 minutes while I kept glancing up at them. They weren't following the road exactly, but they were staying roughly parallel. I slowed down a bit, trying to get a better look. At some point, I pulled over onto the shoulder and shut the engine off. Total silence. I stepped out of the truck. The lights were still there, maybe a little lower now. Then, out of nowhere, they split. Each one darted off in a different direction. One shot left, one up, one straight back. They moved so fast, I barely tracked it. No curves, just instant movement. They were gone. I stood there, trying to process what I'd just seen. I thought maybe it was some kind of test aircraft, drones maybe, but I've never seen anything move like that, especially not without any sound. It wasn't until I turned back toward the truck that I saw they'd come back. Same 3 lights, same triangle formation, exactly where they'd been before. That part freaked me out more than the scattering. I hadn't seen them return. I was looking right in that part of the sky. No movement. They were just suddenly back. I got in the truck, turned the key, and drove. Didn't floor it or anything. I didn't want to draw attention, but I wanted to put some distance between me and whatever that was. I kept checking the mirrors and glancing up through the windshield, but the lights stayed where they were for a while. Just tracking, it seemed like, never closing in, never fading out. Then they blinked off again. Not moved. Just off, like someone flipped a switch. That was the last I saw them. About 10 minutes later, my dash clock reset. Just flickered out, then came back with the wrong time. Something like 4:11 a.m., which didn't match my watch or phone. The odometer had reset too, like I just turned the truck on for the first time. That kind of thing doesn't usually happen while you're driving. I pulled into Beatty around 1:30 and checked into one of those little motels across from the gas station. The guy at the desk gave me a weird look. Said I looked pale. I told him I'd had a long drive. In the room, I sat on the bed for a while with the TV on mute, just trying to go back through it all in my head. I didn't fall asleep until the sky started getting light, and even then, it didn't feel like I really slept. I was camped about 30 miles west of Marfa, Texas, on BLM land. Just flat, dry country out there, scrub brush, hard pan dirt, and not much else. I'd parked my truck off a 2-track road and hiked a half-mile out with my gear. No one around. That was kind of the point. I'd done a dozen solo camping trips like that, mostly out in the desert. No cell service, no noise, no lights. I slept in a one-man tent with a mesh roof so I could see the stars. Brought plenty of water, a little food, and a satellite phone just in case. That night it had been dry and windy, same as always. The wind had kicked up around sundown, but it died down after dark. I stayed up a while, just watching the sky. You could see the Milky Way clear as anything, and there were a couple meteors early on. I remember thinking how quiet it was. No bugs, no coyotes, nothing moving, just me and the wind. I fell asleep a little after 11, woke up sometime later, couldn't say when. No watch, and my phone was powered off in my pack to save battery, but it was still dark, pitch dark, the kind that presses on your eyes. At first, I didn't notice anything wrong, just thought the stillness was weird. No breeze anymore, not even a rustle from the brush. Dead calm. Then I sat up and realized it was too quiet. Usually in the desert at night, you hear at least something, an owl, a far-off dog, even your own heartbeat. But this was like someone had stuffed cotton in my ears. No sound at all. I reached for my flashlight, clicked it on, and unzipped the tent. The beam caught the dirt outside, and I froze. There was a ring. A perfect circle, maybe 20 feet across, centered right on my tent. The ground inside the circle looked darker than the rest, like it had been burned. The scrub grass and brush were completely gone, just bare, blackened earth. But there was no smell, no heat. I touched the dirt with my hand, and it was cold. Dry and packed hard, like the heat had never been there. Like something had erased everything that used to be in that spot. I stood up and turned in a slow circle, checking for footprints or tire tracks or anything. Nothing. The rest of the desert was untouched. My truck was parked way off to the east, just a faint shadow in the distance. I walked to the edge of the ring. The line was sharp, like it had been drawn with a compass. On one side, the usual mix of pale dirt, thorny brush, and rocks. On the other side, nothing but the smooth, dark patch. It didn't make sense. If there had been fire, I would have smelled it. There would have been smoke, or at least some sign in the air. But the night smelled like nothing. No ozone, no ash, just dry desert. I stood out there for a while, scanning the sky. No clouds, no planes, no satellites passing over. Just stars, unmoving, and the longer I looked, the more it felt like something should be moving, like the stillness wasn't natural. Eventually I got cold and went back into the tent, zipped it up, but I didn't sleep. Just lay there with the flashlight in my hand, listening to the quiet and watching the mesh ceiling. A few hours later, probably close to dawn, I heard a faint humming. Low, deep, like a generator running miles away. I sat up again and held my breath. It got a little louder, then faded, not like something moving past, more like it was turning down, and then it was gone. When the sun finally came up, I got out and looked around again. The circle was still there. The burn pattern looked almost fake, like it had been stamped on. The edge was too clean. I packed up fast and walked back to my truck. Didn't eat, didn't make coffee, just stuffed everything into my pack and hiked out. I kept looking over my shoulder the whole time. I don't even know what for. Back at the truck, I checked the tires, then sat behind the wheel for a few minutes, just staring out at the desert. I didn't see anyone. No other vehicles, no trails in the dust, just the same scrub and rocks. I drove straight back to Alpine and found a cheap motel. I stayed there 2 nights, trying to talk myself out of what I saw. Later that week, I went over my gear. Everything seemed normal, no damage, nothing scorched, but my compass was off, only by a few degrees, but still off. I checked it against my phone and a second compass I had in a drawer. Both of those matched. The one I took camping kept drifting, like it didn't want to settle. I didn't report anything. Who would I even report it to? I went back to the same spot 3 weeks later in the middle of the day. Not to camp, just to look. The circle was gone. The earth was dry and cracked like the rest of the desert. A few green shoots were poking up. No sign of anything burned. But the brush hadn't grown back in the ring. It was like the land didn't remember what was supposed to be there. It was close to midnight, sometime in early October, a few years back. I was working late at the shop out at Ransom Airfield, just east of town. Tiny place. We're not even on sectional charts anymore. Just a grass runway, a metal hangar, and a handful of Cessnas that belong to a couple crop dusters and some hobby guys who can't afford hangar fees at Joliet. I'd been helping out there part-time for years, fixing alternators, patching skins, the usual. That night I was replacing brake pads on a Piper Cherokee that belonged to a guy named Walt Corcoran. He wasn't in a rush, but I'd had a rough week and needed something quiet to clear my head, so I figured I'd knock it out. The hangar had those big rolling doors open, letting in the cold air. There was a space heater going near the workbench, but otherwise it was just me, the plane, and the sound of hand tools tapping metal. I'd parked my truck on the gravel about 20 feet outside the hangar. No other cars around, no lights either, besides the one inside over my bench and the little LED clipped to my hat. The airfield doesn't have tower lights or strobes, it's just a bare strip of grass in the middle of farmland. Closest neighbor is a quarter mile through the cornfields. I remember stepping outside to take a leak around 11:45. I always walk off to the edge of the gravel, so I'm not doing it right by the hangar door. It was colder than I expected, probably low 40s and real clear out. No clouds, no wind. I could see Orion just coming up over the eastern tree line. That's when I heard something weird, or rather, I noticed how quiet it was. Even out there, you usually get crickets or owls or distant trucks on I-55, but there was nothing. Just dead silence, like the kind you hear before a storm, but the sky was clean. When I turned around to walk back, I saw something out over the runway. It was hovering maybe 30-40 feet above the ground, about 200 yards down from the hangar. I don't know how long it had been there. I didn't hear it come in. At first, I thought it was a drone, a big one, maybe military, because of the shape. It was triangular, not like a stealth jet though, more like a stretched out pyramid with a flat bottom and soft, rounded corners. Each point had a faint white light, but they weren't shining down or casting any glow, just soft like LEDs behind frosted glass. The thing wasn't moving, not a wobble, not a twitch, just hanging there, perfectly still, a few dozen feet above the grass. I stood there staring, trying to make sense of it. I wasn't scared right away, just confused. I thought maybe some kind of training op. We get a few Chinooks from the guard base every now and then. But this wasn't that. There was no rotor sound, no blades, no engine noise at all. I started walking toward it, slow. I didn't even realize I'd left the hangar light behind me until I looked down and couldn't see my own shadow anymore. About halfway down the strip, maybe 100 yards from it, the thing shifted. It didn't move left or right, it just rotated slightly like it was turning to face me. Even though it didn't have any markings or windows that I could see. Just 3 dull lights and a dark, metallic underside that caught the starlight in weird ways, like it was absorbing more than it reflected. I stopped walking, my chest felt tight, like I'd just run up a hill. Then, without any warning, it blinked out. Not flew away, not faded, just gone. Like someone flipped a switch. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't. No noise, no breeze, not even displaced air. The silence stayed. I remember standing there for a long time afterward, not moving, half expecting it to pop back in like a bad projection. but it didn't. I walked back to the hangar eventually. Didn't even finish the brake job. I just sat on the creeper seat for a while, hands on my knees, trying to decide if I'd hallucinated the whole thing. On my way out, I checked the truck dash for the time. It said 12:08. That meant I'd been standing out there at least 10, maybe 15 minutes. Felt shorter than that. Next morning, I drove back out and checked the grass along the runway. Nothing. No burns. No indentations. Not even disturbed dew. The Cherokee was right where I left it, tools still on the rag. I walked down to where I thought the thing had been, crouched down, ran my hand over the grass. Just normal. Dry. Cold. A little flattened from wind the day before, but nothing unusual. I didn't tell Walt, or anyone, really. I just said I didn't finish the job that night and came back out Sunday to wrap it up. A couple weeks later, I was having beers with Kent Miller, who used to be a lineman for ComEd, but now runs a private flight school down in Peoria. I told him about it, more as a joke, the way people tell fish stories. He got real quiet and said he'd seen something dumb as hell out near Havana a few months back. Also triangle-shaped, also silent. We both just laughed it off, but neither of us really pushed for details. I've been back out at Ransom plenty since then. Nothing weird. Same old cornfields, same old hangar, but every now and then when I'm locking up late, I'll catch myself looking down the runway longer than I need to. Just in case. It was a Phoenix to Portland run, mid-March. I was in the left seat, Captain John Presley, flying a 737-800. Smooth flight, cruising at 30,000 feet, light headwinds. We were just past Salt Lake, flying over southeastern Idaho. Clear skies above, some scattered cloud layers below us around 20,000. It was a routine flight, boring even. We'd been handed off to Salt Lake Center and the radios were pretty quiet for that stretch. My co-pilot Renee had just taken over the controls while I sipped my coffee and ran through the weather ahead. Around 2:10 p.m., I glanced out the left side. There was a break in the clouds down below, maybe 8,000 or 10,000 feet beneath us. That's when I saw it. A metallic object just sitting there, maybe halfway between our altitude and the clouds, so probably around 25,000 feet. Dead still. Not drifting, not rotating, just hovering in midair. It wasn't a balloon. I've seen plenty of those, and they move with the wind or tumble. This didn't. It was smooth, oval, almost like a flattened pill and reflective, catching the sunlight on the top curve. At first I thought maybe I was seeing another aircraft at a strange angle, but there were no contrails, no wings, no motion. I leaned forward and pointed it out to Renee. "You seeing that?" She squinted, followed my finger, and after a second said, "Yeah, what is that?" I don't know how long we watched it, probably 30 seconds. That doesn't sound like a long time, but up there with nothing else going on, it felt long. It didn't change altitude or orientation. It just was. Then it shot upward, not diagonally, straight up, like it had been yanked by a wire. No arc, no acceleration curve. 1 second it was there, the next it was just gone. I blinked and scanned the sky for it, thinking maybe it had moved laterally, but there was nothing. Clear blue all the way up. Renee looked over at me. "Did it just..." "Yeah," I said. Neither of us said anything for a while. I was waiting for a TCAS alert, something to indicate another aircraft had come close, but nothing showed. I keyed the mic. "Salt Lake Center, Southwest 2208. Southwest 2208, go ahead. Just wondering if you have any traffic about 10 miles south of us, maybe around flight level 250? There was a pause. "Negative, Southwest 2208. No traffic in that vicinity. You say 250? "Affirmative. Something metallic, no transponder." Another pause. "Copy that. We'll log it. Nothing on radar at that altitude in your sector." That was it. They didn't ask for a report or anything. About 10 minutes later, Renee asked me if I was going to file anything when we landed. I told her I'd think about it, but I never did. We both agreed it wasn't a drone. Too high, too still, too fast when it left. It didn't behave like anything I'd seen in over 15 years of flying. The rest of the flight was uneventful, but we didn't talk much. I think we were both trying to convince ourselves it was something normal, even though we knew it wasn't. I haven't seen anything like it before or since. I was hiking with my buddy, Eric, out near the old Clearview Fire Tower last September. We'd planned a 2-day trip through the hills east of Spokane. Nothing crazy, just some familiar trails and camping near the tower itself. It's a popular spot for locals, but pretty remote if you stick to the back routes, which we did. We started early morning, weather was crisp and clear. You know that kind of fall day where the air feels clean but not cold, and the sky's a deep blue. We had GPS units for navigation and handheld radios to keep in touch, mostly because the area has some sketchy spots for cell service. We hit the trail around 7 a.m., light packs, good energy. The hike was smooth, nothing out of the ordinary. We chatted, joked about how dangerous we were being in the wilderness with all our gadgets. The tower wasn't open to the public anymore, just an old metal skeleton on the ridge, used maybe a few decades ago for spotting fires. Around noon, we reached the base of the hill leading up to the tower. Eric wanted to check it out, so we left our packs by a tree and started climbing the narrow path. The forest was quiet except for some distant birds and the crunch of dry leaves underfoot. We got to the tower, and the view was exactly what you'd expect. Miles of trees rolling out under a blue sky, with the city faint on the horizon. I pulled out my GPS to mark the spot and check our position, but the unit flickered and then went blank. I tried turning it off and back on. Nothing. Eric's unit was doing the same thing. Must be dead batteries, I said, but we both knew they were new. Still, I checked mine again and even swapped batteries between units, but no luck. Eric grabbed his radio and clicked the button to check in. "Dispatch, this is Eagle 1. Do you copy?" His voice sounded weirdly hesitant. No response. "Try again," I said. He tried a few more times. No static, no crackle, just silence. I tried mine next, but the same. That's when it started to feel off. We both looked at each other, then around. The forest was still quiet, but the lack of radio and GPS seemed impossible. We were pretty sure there'd been some kind of glitch with the devices. Maybe the hill was messing with the signals. We decided to keep moving toward the tower, figuring cell phones might still work up top or that maybe the radios would come back. Once at the tower platform, we took a break and scanned the horizon. Nothing unusual. But then, as the sun started to lower, maybe 5 p.m. by then, Eric pointed up. "Hey, look at the sky. Do you see that?" I looked up. The stars were just coming out, a few twinkling in the blue twilight. But something was strange. They didn't look like the usual star pattern I knew. We'd both spent a good amount of time outdoors and had seen these constellations countless times. But tonight, the stars were shifting. Slowly, almost like someone was moving points of light around. At first, I thought it was my eyes playing tricks, maybe clouds moving or light pollution from the city glinting off the atmosphere. But Eric said, "No, look, they're rearranging. That cluster isn't Orion anymore. It's something else." I squinted, trying to make sense of the shapes. The stars seemed to realign themselves into unfamiliar geometric patterns. Nothing that matched any constellation I'd ever seen. I checked the time on my watch. No way it was a meteor shower or anything astronomical. I pulled out my phone to snap a photo, but the screen froze. I tried turning the camera off, then back on. Same thing. I started feeling that tight sensation in my chest, like a low hum of anxiety or confusion. We stayed up on the tower for another 20 minutes, watching the stars slowly drift into different shapes. Eric was quiet, just watching. Then I noticed something else. The forest below us was still. No rustling, no wind, no birds calling goodnight. Even the usual insect buzz was absent. We should have heard something, but there was nothing. I turned to Eric. "Did you feel that? Like the air? It's weirdly still." He nodded. "Yeah, like the whole place is holding its breath." I thought about suggesting we get down and head back, but the sun had dipped below the trees and the sky was darkening fast. The trail back was steep and tricky in fading light. But the thought of staying there didn't sit right either. We packed up and started down, using our compasses and memory for direction since GPS was dead. Halfway down, I glanced behind us and caught a faint glow near the tower, almost like a light source hovering just above the trees, but it wasn't moving like a flashlight or lantern. It was soft, white, and diffuse. I nudged Eric and pointed it out. He nodded but said, "Could be a plane or a drone." I shook my head. No sound, though. We stopped and listened. Nothing. We moved faster, trying to put some distance between us and the glow, but it seemed to stay in place. As we rounded the last bend before the trailhead, I checked my watch again. That's when I realized we'd lost time. We'd been on the trail for a solid hour, but the sun should have been fully set by now. Instead, it was still dusk, like the light had reset itself. We both noticed it, said it aloud, but neither of us had an answer. When we got back to the car, the GPS and radios suddenly kicked back on like nothing had happened. I looked over at Eric. He said, "Maybe we shouldn't come back here after dark." I didn't disagree. On the drive home, everything felt heavy, like the woods were closing behind us. That night, I kept checking the photos I managed to take earlier, but none showed the stars rearranging or the glow from the tower. Just regular, blurry shots of the forest. I've told a few friends about it, but mostly I keep it to myself. I don't know what we saw up there, or what happened with the time, but every time I look at the stars now, I wonder if they're really where I think they are. I took the Subaru up to Eagles Pass that night because I needed some air. That, and I just picked up a used Canon 6D from a guy in Glenwood and wanted to test the long exposure settings. I like shooting night skies, stars over ridgelines, that kind of thing. I'm not good enough to sell them, but it's something that calms me down. No traffic, no notifications, just the shutter and the cold. I got up there a little after 9:30. The road past the ranger gate was still open, even though there was a little snow on the shoulders. It was clear that night. Cold, maybe in the 30s, and dry. Moon wasn't out yet, but the sky was full of stars, sharp and bright like they get at elevation. I parked at the Overlook pull-off, the one with the broken coin viewer and the bench nobody ever uses. No one else was up there. I didn't see a single set of headlights for the last 5 miles. I killed the engine, left the hazards on for a second, then turned everything off. Whole mountain went still. I set up the tripod just off the gravel facing northwest where the trees drop off and you can see the next ridge over. I've shot that spot before. It's perfect for catching Orion and Taurus coming up over the slope. The first couple shots went fine. 30-second exposures, ISO bumped up to 3200, wide open. I didn't have a remote trigger, so I was using the timer to avoid shake. I got a few good ones. Nothing fancy, but you could make out the Milky Way stretching just above the pines. I stood there flipping through them on the screen, mostly just checking focus and exposure. Then I tried a 60-second shot, just to test the noise handling. When it finished, the screen came up black. No stars, no silhouette, no error message, just black. I thought maybe I'd bumped the lens cap or the settings, but everything looked fine. I tried again, another black frame. It wasn't the battery, I checked. It was nearly full. I swapped SD cards just in case, but that didn't help either. The next 3 long exposures came out the same way. Total black. No sensor noise, no hot pixels, nothing. I crouched down and wiped the lens, checked the mount, powered the camera off and on again. It seemed to be working normally. Menus, playback, everything. I tried a regular exposure at 1/10 of a second. That came out fine. Trees, stars, everything. But the long exposures kept failing. I stood up and looked around, trying to see if maybe fog had rolled in without me noticing, or if clouds had covered the sky. But it was perfectly clear. I could see my breath, sure, but the air was still and dry. Stars were bright as ever, and quiet. No wind, no bugs, not even distant traffic. That's when I noticed something weird about the tree line. I'd been looking through the camera's screen so much that I hadn't really noticed it at first. But when I looked out again, just with my eyes, the ridge across from me felt off. I couldn't say why. It looked flatter than it should have. Like the top edge of the trees had been drawn with a ruler. Just this perfectly straight horizontal edge, which I knew wasn't normal. That ridge is jagged. I've hiked it. There's dips and tall pines that break the line, but here it looks smooth, almost artificial. I lifted the camera and pointed toward it. One more 60-second shot. While it processed, I tried to listen for anything. Maybe some machine or a low drone hum. Nothing. Just my own breathing and the tiny tick of the shutter closing. The screen blinked on. This time, there was something there. Stars, yes, but also a row of 5 faint lights just above the tree line. Evenly spaced, small and round, almost like distant aircraft lights, but too still. too level. I stared at the screen for a long time. I hadn't seen any lights with my eyes. I looked up again. Nothing. Just the trees and stars. But in the photo, clear as anything, there they were. I zoomed in. The lights didn't look like reflections or sensor flare. They were dim, like maybe from behind a fogged window, and had a warm white hue, not the harsh blue you get from lens artifacts. They were perfectly in line, no sag or rise, as if whatever they were on hadn't shifted at all during the full minute the shutter was open. I took another shot. The lights were gone. I stood there, just holding the camera, not even reviewing the new photo. I was suddenly aware of how alone I was up there. I didn't want to move. My chest felt tight again, like I was holding my breath without meaning to. Then I heard a sound, very soft, like a pressure change. A single low pop, almost like when you crack your ears after altitude gain. But no plane had gone over, no wind had started up, just that faint pressure shift and then silence again. I turned around and looked toward my car. It was maybe 20 feet away, sitting dark and quiet. I took a few slow steps toward it, not running, just needing to be near it. When I got to the door, I opened it, sat down, and shut it behind me. I didn't drive away right then. I just sat there, camera still in my hands, engine off, watching the tree line through the windshield. Every few minutes, I'd look down at the screen again, flip back to the one photo with the lights. It looked exactly the same each time. 5 lights. Faint, steady. Steady. Nothing else around them. I don't know how long I sat there before I started the engine. Probably close to an hour. I didn't see any other cars on the way down. No animals, either. Usually you see deer near the switchbacks, or at least hear owls. When I got home, I pulled the files onto my laptop. Every photo looked normal, except that one. The metadata showed the same exposure settings as the others. No corruption, no weird timestamps. Just one 60-second frame with something in it that wasn't before or after. I didn't edit it. I didn't post it anywhere. It's still on the drive in the folder from that night, just labeled with the date. I haven't been back to Eagles Pass since. I live about 2 miles down a gravel road from the old Hawk Ridge radar station. It shut down maybe 10 years ago, part of some Cold War cleanup. The place is fenced off and mostly abandoned, but you can still see the big white radar domes from my porch on a clear night. I've been here nearly 5 years now, moved out from the city looking for quiet, fresh air, that kind of thing. What I didn't expect was how weird the nights would get. It started a few months after I settled in. I don't know why, but I noticed something odd happening almost every night right around 1:09 a.m. It's strangely specific, I know, but at exactly that time, not before, not after, everything outside just stops. The birds, which are usually chirping or fluttering even at odd hours, suddenly go completely silent. The wind, which is almost always there in some form, just drops, like someone hit a pause button. At first, I thought I was imagining it. You get used to background noise, but when it disappears for a moment, it's obvious. It's like the world holds its breath. One night, I was sitting on my porch, smoking a cigarette, watching the dome light reflect off the clouds. I had my phone out, glancing at the clock. When it hit 1:08, the usual soft hum of wind was around, and some distant birds were still calling. Then, right at 1:09, it all died. The birds, the wind. And the night got unnaturally still. Even the trees stopped moving. It wasn't just quiet. It felt like the air itself had thickened or maybe become heavy. My ears popped, and I had that weird, slightly dizzy feeling you get when you're underwater or on a plane descending. It lasted maybe 45 seconds. Then everything snapped back. Birds started chirping again, the wind kicked up, and I was left staring at the empty sky. I tried to time it again the next few nights. Same thing. Every night, 1:09 sharp. No exceptions, even on nights when the weather was dead calm or when storms rolled through earlier in the evening. The next morning, I told my neighbor Frank, who's lived here his whole life. He's in his 60s, rancher type, pretty grounded guy. "You're nuts," he said. "Ain't nothing special about that time." I pressed him anyway. "Nope," he said, "but the birds do get quiet sometimes when the weather's changing." I mentioned the wind stopping too. "Wind don't just stop, not like that," Frank laughed. So that was that. I figured maybe I was just hyper aware and my brain was making something out of nothing. Then a couple weeks later, I was outside late, just pacing the yard. It'd been a long day and I was too wired to sleep. I looked up at the sky around 1:05 a.m. The clouds were thin, just drifting over the stars. I could hear the usual night sounds, some crickets, distant hoot of an owl, a breeze moving the branches. I had my phone in my pocket, but I wasn't checking the time every second. I just noticed the noises shifting as the clock crept closer to 1:09. When the minute hit, the birds went completely silent. The wind dropped off like someone turned it off. But this time, something else happened. I swear, the stars dimmed. Not just the clouds passing, but the stars themselves seemed to blink or fade for a moment. It was subtle, like a flicker on a screen that you almost don't catch unless you're paying close attention. I rubbed my eyes, but the effect was still there. Then the air seemed to thicken again, that weird pressure building in my chest and ears. After about 40 seconds, the stars popped back to normal brightness, and the wind and birds returned like nothing happened. I went inside and looked at the clock. 1:10 a.m. I started marking the nights on a notebook after that. 20 days in a row, it happened. Same thing every night. 1:09, silence, still air, the flicker in the sky. I even set up a small microphone and a wind gauge in the yard to see if I could catch anything unusual. The recordings confirmed the silence and lack of wind for exactly that time frame. No radio interference, no strange sounds, just quiet. One night, I thought maybe the power company was doing something with the radar station's old equipment. So I drove out there to check the perimeter. The gate was locked tight, like always. No lights on. I sat in my truck across the road at 1:09, waiting. Nothing happened there. No lights, no hum. Just the same silence and stillness washing over the area like a wave. I felt like I was being watched that night. Not in a spooky way, but like something was paying attention from the shadows of the trees just beyond the fence. I looked around, called out softly. No response. I got back in my truck and drove home. The next morning, my dog didn't want to go outside. She kept looking toward the trees near the radar station and whining quietly. The weirdest thing is that when I'm away from the house, like if I stay in town with friends, I don't notice the silence at all. It only happens here, close to the ridge. It's almost like the land itself is tuned to something I can't see or hear. Sometimes I wonder if it's a natural phenomenon, something atmospheric, or maybe a leftover effect from the radar station's old equipment messing with the environment. But every explanation I come up with feels lacking. I tried telling my sister about it, and she thought I was just stressing myself out, making a story out of coincidences. But I can't shake the feeling that something's different here at night, at that exact time. Last month, I decided to set up a video camera pointed at the radar dome. I figured if anything unusual was happening, I might catch a glimpse. On the footage, right around 1:09, the whole frame briefly flickers, like a glitch on the camera, and the image distorts for about a second. Then it's back to normal. The birds and wind are quiet on the audio track too. No flashes or beams of light, no moving shapes, just that flicker. I don't know what to make of it. It's hard to explain to people who haven't been here, and I'm not one for wild stories or conspiracy stuff, but the silence, the stillness, that moment of emptiness in the night, it's real. Every night on the dot at 1:09, the world around me stops for a minute, and I'm left wondering why. I'd been chasing storms in Oklahoma for almost 10 years when I saw something I still can't explain. I'm Matt, worked as a storm chaser and weather photographer for a living. It's not glamorous like the movies make it, mostly driving for hours, watching radar, and hoping to catch a good shot. But that night in late May, something happened that wasn't in any forecast or science book. I was on the edge of a small town called Perkins, about 30 miles northeast of Oklahoma City. The sky was boiling with dark clouds, thick and heavy, like someone had stuffed a wet blanket up there. It had been raining all day, but the real action was just starting after sunset. The forecast called for severe thunderstorms with lightning, strong winds, and maybe a tornado. Perfect conditions for me. I parked my truck on a quiet dirt road about 2 miles from the town. The air smelled like wet earth and ozone, the kind of sharp smell you only get right before a big storm. I grabbed my camera gear and tripod and I headed out on foot, wanting to get a clear shot of the towering thunderhead. The wind was picking up, whipping through the tall grass, and the sky was turning an angry shade of purple-gray. As I walked closer to the storm's base, I noticed something strange. About 800 feet up inside the lowest part of the thunderhead, where the rain was thickest and the wind usually tore through, there was this glow. It was a soft, pale blue light, like a lantern glowing inside the cloud, but it didn't flicker like lightning or flash like a plane. It just hovered there, steady against the turbulent blackness. I raised my camera and zoomed in, trying to get a better look. The glow was about the size of a beach ball from where I stood, maybe a little bigger. What really got me was that it didn't move with the wind. The storm's lower winds were howling sideways, pushing everything in one direction, but this light was drifting the opposite way. Slow, deliberate, almost like it was swimming upstream through the turbulent air. I kept filming and snapping pictures, feeling a weird mix of excitement and unease. Usually, everything inside a storm moves violently with the wind. Debris, rain, hail, even insects caught in the gusts all get tossed around. But this sphere, if that's what it was steady, like it had its own rules. I moved a little to get a better angle, edging toward a slight rise where I could see the whole cloud. The thunderhead stretched miles across the horizon, and lightning was flickering inside the upper parts, cracking the sky with purple-white streaks. Then I saw it again. This glowing ball was still there, halfway up the cloud, moving slow and deliberate against the wind. That's when the storm really started to roar. The rain kicked up and the wind pushed harder. I felt it in my bones, the kind of storm that makes you want to run. But I stayed, glued to my camera, because I thought if I blinked, I'd miss something important. Suddenly, there was a bright, jagged flash of lightning. It struck a tall oak tree about 100 yards from where I stood. The thunder crashed so loud it felt like my chest was rattling. I ducked instinctively, and for a second, the whole world went white from the lightning's reflection. When my vision cleared, the glowing sphere was gone, like it had blinked out. I looked back up at the cloud, squinting, but the glow hadn't returned. The storm rumbled on, heavy and dark, but the light was just gone. I stayed there for another 15 minutes, hoping it would come back, or that I had imagined it somehow. The wind was howling again, pushing rain sideways, and the storm was moving fast. I packed up quickly and headed back to the truck, feeling the first real cold prickles of fear creep in. Driving home, the storm chased me for miles, and my mind kept replaying what I saw. I showed the photos and video to a few friends who chase storms too, and while some were skeptical, others admitted they'd seen strange things before. Unexplainable flashes, odd shapes inside clouds, but nothing that stayed visible like what I saw. I went back to the spot the next 2 nights, hoping to catch it again, but the storms weren't the same. No glowing sphere, no steady light, just the usual lightning and thunder. That image, this pale blue orb moving slowly against the wind inside a storm, sticks with me. It wasn't a plane or drone, no way. No blinking lights, no sound, no obvious tech. Just this steady glow, pushing the opposite way in a violent thunderhead and then gone in a flash. I've thought about what it could be. Some kind of weird atmospheric phenomenon, a trick of light or reflection. But I'm no scientist, just a guy who's seen a lot of storms. Nothing else I've encountered matches what happened that night. Most days, I just chalk it up to one of those strange things you see out here that don't have a neat explanation. But sometimes, when a big thunderstorm rolls in and the wind shifts, I can't help but wonder if it's still out there, somewhere inside the clouds, moving quietly against the chaos. I was working the night shift at a storage facility on the outskirts of Lincoln, Nebraska last fall. My name's Jake. I'd taken the job because I'd recently moved back home after college, and it was steady enough to cover bills while I figured out what to do next. The place was mostly quiet, a bunch of metal storage units lined up behind a chain link fence, and a handful of security cameras feeding to a monitor in the office where I sat. It was about 2:15 a.m. on a Tuesday when I noticed something that didn't add up. The night had been calm. The usual hum from the streetlights, a distant dog barking maybe once or twice, but otherwise, nothing. I was scrolling through footage on the monitor, killing time, when out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move in the parking lot through the big front window. At first, I thought it was just a shadow from a passing car's headlights, but there weren't any cars around, and the lot was empty except for a few trailers. I stood up, looked out through the glass, nothing there, just empty asphalt lit by those orange streetlights. I sat back down, feeling a little dumb for getting jumpy, and kept watching the monitors. Then it happened again. This time, the shadow was sharper. It moved fast, a flicker, low and wide, just on the far edge of the lot by the fence. It didn't look like any animal I'd seen, too big and oddly shaped. The weird part was that there were no lights anywhere near it. No headlights, no flashlight, no glow at all. It was just a dark, dark shape moving like it was sucking up the light around it. I tried to shake it off and went outside to check. The night was unusually cold for October. There was this strange breeze, but it didn't feel natural. Usually when the wind picks up, it rustles the leaves, rattles the chain link fence, maybe kicks up some dust. But this breeze was silent. It didn't move anything. It just kind of hung in the air, cold and still. Walking around the parking lot, I kept looking for whatever the shadow had been. No footprints, no signs of anyone or anything. The trailers were locked up tight, no gaps or places someone could hide. It was just me, the cold, and that eerie feeling that I wasn't alone. Back inside, I tried to get back to work. The security system was mostly automated, but every now and then, I had to run checks or respond to alarms. That night, nothing went off, but every so often I caught a glimpse of that shadow on the monitors, always darting just out of full view. It never came close to the cameras, just enough to be noticed. Then around 3:20 a.m., everything went quiet. I don't mean the usual quiet of night shifts. I mean like the world itself stopped making noise. The hum of the lights, the buzz of the fridge in the office, even the ticking of the clock on the wall, it all faded away. I looked out the window and saw the parking lot in complete stillness, bathed in that dull orange light. The wind was gone, the shadows frozen. Then, across the lot near the fence, a shape moved again. This time I saw it clearly, but it wasn't a person, at least not like a human. It was dark, maybe 6 feet tall, but the shape was wrong. The edges blurred, like it was bending or melting into the night. It didn't have features, no eyes, no face, no limbs I could make out. Just a blackness against the orange light. The weirdest part was how the air around it looked. It was like the heat was sucked out of a small patch of the night. I felt the cold hit me suddenly, a drop in temperature that felt deeper than the fall air. I wanted to call someone, but my phone was dead. No signal. I tried blinking, hoping it was a trick of tired eyes or shadows. When I looked back, the figure was gone. The air warmed up again, the sounds of the night slowly returned. The buzz in the office kicked back in. I sat down hard, hands shaking a bit, trying to figure out what I'd just seen. I wanted to convince myself it was a shadow, or maybe a trick with the streetlights and the fence, but it felt too real, like it was watching me. I finished my shift without anything else happening. I didn't see the shape again, and the cameras showed nothing unusual. When I told the day manager what happened, he just nodded and said, "Storage facilities attract weird stuff at night." I laughed it off, but inside I wasn't so sure. That's the thing. I don't know what it was. No footsteps, no noise, just that cold presence and the black shape moving across the parking lot. Every night since then, I keep expecting to see it again, but it hasn't come back. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I swear I feel like something's watching me from the shadows, but whenever I turn around, there's nothing there. Maybe it was just me. Maybe not. Either way, that night at the storage lot is one of those things I can't quite explain. We'd been out on Lake Almanor for a few hours, just my wife, Emily, and me, cruising around in our little motorboat. It was late August, early evening, that time when the sun's just dipping and the light softens, but it's not quite dark yet. The water was calm, the air warm but starting to cool, and the whole place was quiet, except for the hum of the motor and the occasional call of a loon somewhere out near the far shore. We usually didn't stay out this late. but Emily wanted to catch the sunset from the middle of the lake. She loves that calm, reflective time when everything slows down. I don't mind it either, especially after a hectic week at work. We weren't in any rush. We were about a mile out from the marina when she pointed at something floating not far from us. At first, I thought it was just a reflection, or maybe some plastic trash drifting on the water, but as we got closer, I realized it wasn't either. It was a soft glow, kind of like a pale greenish light, not bright like a flashlight, but enough to stand out against the darkening lake. "What the hell?" Emily said, her voice low, eyes fixed on the glow. I nodded, but kept the boat slow and steady. The light hovered maybe 3 feet above the water, and the shape was hard to make out, kind of round but irregular, like something translucent caught just under the surface. No shape I could identify. I pulled the throttle back, and we drifted closer, watching it pulse slowly, like a breathing light. Then, just as we got within 20 feet, the light started to sink. Emily leaned forward, her face tense but curious. "Wait, is it going under?" "Yeah," I said, a little surprised myself. I looked all around to see if maybe it was attached to something. No buoy, no boat, no rope. Just that light, slipping slowly beneath the water. The weirdest part was what happened next. When it sank, there was no splash. Usually, even something small hitting the lake makes a noise, or at least some kind of ripple that breaks the surface sharply. But this time, it was like the water swallowed the light whole without a sound. The surface stayed still for a moment, and then a ripple spread out from the spot, slow and smooth, almost too perfect. Like it was radiating in silent waves rather than the usual messy, wind-driven ripples you expect on a lake. Emily frowned and grabbed the side of the boat. "Did you see that?" No splash, but the water moved like it was pushed from underneath or something. I was feeling a bit uneasy, but the place was so isolated and quiet, I thought maybe it was just some weird water current or an animal moving under the surface. I switched off the motor and reached for my flashlight, aiming it at the spot where the light disappeared. The water was dark and calm again, but the ripples kept spreading out, moving in slow circles, fading only after a good 30 seconds. We sat there in silence, watching. Then, out of nowhere, the engine sputtered and died. I tapped the throttle, but the motor just gave a little cough and went silent. Great, I thought. Out here, middle of the lake, at dusk with a dead motor. Emily reached for her phone, but of course, no signal. We were too far out and surrounded by dense pine forest. I tried the starter a few more times. Nothing. The sky was fading fast now, the last bit of sunset gone, leaving a bluish-gray gloom that made the lake feel colder than it was. "Okay," I said, trying to keep calm. "We'll have to row back." Emily nodded, pulling out the oars we keep on board for emergencies. As I started helping her get the oars in the water, I glanced back at the spot where the light had sunk. For a moment, I thought I saw something move just beneath the surface, like a shadow or shape passing by, but it was gone before I could be sure. I shook my head. "It's probably just a fish or something." We started rowing toward shore, slow and steady, cutting through the quiet water. After a few minutes, Emily broke the silence. "Mark, did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "That sound." I stopped rowing and listened. There was a low humming noise coming from the water itself, not the boat. It was faint, but definitely there, almost like a tone that vibrated beneath the surface. "Yeah," I said, "I hear it." It wasn't like a motor or any engine I knew. It was more consistent, a steady pitch that didn't change. We kept rowing, both of us glancing around nervously. As we got closer to the shore, the humming faded. When we finally reached the dock, I got out and pulled the boat in. The moment my feet hit solid ground, the noise stopped completely. Emily and I sat on the dock for a while, just staring at the water. "I don't know what that was," she said quietly. "Me neither." We loaded up the boat and drove home in silence. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Not from the trees or the shore, but from beneath the water, or maybe the sky just above. I checked the boat and the motor the next day. Nothing wrong. No leaks, no clogs, no mechanical problems. It started right up, like nothing had happened. I thought about calling someone at the marine or the local ranger station, but what would I say? That I saw a glowing thing sink under the lake without a splash and the motor died right after? I didn't want to sound crazy. Weeks later, Emily and I went back to the lake. We didn't see anything strange. No glowing, no hum, no silent ripples. But sometimes when the wind is still and the dusk settles in, I think about that light sinking without a sound and the ripples spreading out like it was something alive or something watching. And I wonder if it's still there and just beneath the surface, waiting. I worked the night shift at a gas station out by Jean, Nevada, just off I-15. It's a tiny place, one pump out front, the kind of spot where truckers and long-haul drivers stop for snacks and a quick break. Mostly it's just me and the flickering neon sign outside, with the highway humming in the background. Nothing fancy, but it pays the bills. One night in early March, around midnight, this guy pulled in. I noticed him right away because he wasn't like the usual customers. He wasn't in a rush or anything. In fact, he barely moved. He parked in the little gravel lot by the side of the store and got out of his car, a dusty black sedan, older model, nothing special. Then he just stood there, staring up at the sky. That's where it got weird. I clocked it. He stayed there, in the same spot, arms at his sides, staring straight up for nearly 3 hours. I was behind the counter the whole time, refilling the snack shelves, wiping down the counter, and I kept sneaking glances at him through the window. Not once did he shift position, look away, or even blink noticeably. Just this intense, motionless stare at the sky. Usually, if someone's outside for that long without moving, they're either talking on the phone or looking at something on the ground or pacing. Not this guy. Just frozen. Around 2:30 a.m., I finally decided to go outside and ask if he needed anything. The night was dry and clear, the kind of desert cold that makes your breath visible but doesn't freeze you solid. I opened the door and called out, "Hey, you all right out here?" He didn't respond, didn't even turn his head. His eyes were fixed on the stars or something beyond them. I stood there for a minute, feeling kind of uncomfortable. The highway noise was low, the desert was quiet except for a faint wind, and the gas station lights cast long shadows. I thought maybe he was just messing around, or maybe waiting for someone. After a couple of minutes, he finally turned slowly toward me, and his expression was blank. Not unfriendly, but like someone who'd been somewhere far away for a while. Then he walked back to his car, got in, and drove off. No words exchanged. Didn't buy anything. I went back inside, shook it off, and finished my shift. The next night, I mentioned it to a couple of the other clerks working nearby, thinking maybe someone else had seen something similar, or maybe the guy came back. Nope, nobody had. Then a week later, a trucker pulled in and told me there'd been some kind of military or government activity up on the nearby hills. Said they'd seen strange lights hovering around just after midnight on the same night that guy was out there. I figured it was probably just some training exercises or maybe a drone test, but it added this weird edge to the memory. I went back and looked at the security footage. The camera outside caught the whole thing. I watched the guy walk out of his car and just stand there. No blinking, no movement except for a slight sway with the wind. After nearly 3 hours, he got back in and left. What really got me was the sky in the footage. There was this faint glow just above the horizon, almost like a ripple in the air. It didn't look like any normal light. No flash, no beams, just a soft shimmer that lasted maybe a minute or two, then disappeared. I rewound the footage multiple times. The glow wasn't there at the start, nor after he left, just during the time he stood outside. I don't know if the guy was watching that or if it was just a coincidence, but something about that night never sat right with me. Sometimes, when it's dead quiet and I'm alone in the store, I'll glance outside and wonder what he saw up there. Or if he saw anything at all. I've worked that shift a few months since, and I haven't seen him or anything like it again. Just the usual night customers, the highway lights, and the desert stars. But that night, for a few hours, something was different. Something that didn't quite belong. I was out on the water before dawn like I usually do. I fished the northern part of Lake Michigan near Charlevoix, Michigan. A quiet spot, nothing fancy, mostly just me, my boat, and the open water. I prefer it that way, no distractions, just the lake and the sky. That morning was late spring, cool and calm, and the air had that damp, earthy smell you get before sunrise. I'd been out since around 2 a.m., hoping to catch some trout before the sun came up. The water was flat, barely a ripple, and the sky was mostly dark but clearing a bit in the east, where the horizon was just starting to lighten. I was sitting on the edge of my boat, waiting for the first signs of fish, when I noticed something weird on the horizon. There was this column of light, pale blue, kind of icy looking, and straight as a ruler. It didn't move or flicker. It just stood there, reaching from the water up into the sky. No sound at all. Not like a searchlight or lightning or anything I'd ever seen. It didn't glow warm or bright, just this cold, steady blue. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of lighthouse beam or a reflection from a distant fishing boat's lights, but I scanned the horizon with my binoculars. No boats, no structures, nothing but the lake and trees along the shore. The light didn't change or pulse, it was just there, perfectly straight and silent. I checked my wristwatch because it felt like time was dragging weirdly. It was 4:06 a.m. I remember that exactly because I thought it was strange. Usually I don't look at the clock when I'm fishing, but this felt different. The column stayed like that for a good 5 or 6 minutes, then it started to fade. Not suddenly, but slowly, like a dimmer switch turning down. As it disappeared, I noticed the water around the base of the light looked odd, like it had a faint ripple that wasn't caused by the wind or the boat. It was subtle, but different. Then I glanced back at my watch, and that's when I saw something I didn't understand. The watch wasn't moving. The second hand was frozen right on 4:06. I tapped it, shook my arm, hoping it was just a glitch or the battery dying, but it stayed stopped. I don't know how long it had been frozen. Maybe the whole time the light was there, maybe just since it faded. I honestly have no idea. I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. No surprise. Out there on the lake, I rarely get reception anyway. I tried to focus on the light again, thinking maybe it would come back or something else would happen, but the horizon was empty. I started to feel kind of uneasy, like I wasn't alone out there. It wasn't fear exactly, more like my skin was crawling and my head was on a swivel. The silence felt too heavy, like the lake itself was holding its breath. I turned the boat toward shore, deciding to pack up early. As I did, I thought I saw something flicker near the tree line on the far shore. Just a flash of blue light, quick and faint. Maybe it was a reflection or some equipment left behind, but it felt connected to that column. The sun began to rise, and with the daylight, everything felt more normal. The sky was clear and pink at the horizon. Birds started to chirp, and the lake looked like the lake I'd known all my life. When I got home, I took my watch apart. The battery was fine, nothing wrong with it. It just stopped. I put in a new battery and it worked again, but I kept thinking about that light. What it was, why it appeared like that, why my watch froze. I went back to that spot a few times after, early mornings like that, but never saw anything similar. The lake was quiet, the same as always. No strange lights, no frozen time. It's been months since that morning, and sometimes I catch myself looking at the clock or the sky, wondering if that column might show up again. I don't know what I saw or what stopped my watch, but I know something out there wasn't quite right. I was working a solo shift out near Twin Falls, Idaho, northeast of town, maybe 5 miles off I-84. It was one of those late summer mornings where everything's already hot by 9 a.m., and the sky's that pale blue that never changes. We'd had a report of a sagging line out by a stretch of old irrigation land. Nothing urgent, but the kind of thing that gets worse if you ignore it too long. My name's Caleb. I've been with the utility company about 11 years. I drive one of the older service trucks, big boxy thing with a utility bed and a ladder rack. No AC, of course. The radio's built into the dispatch console, so it runs on the same circuit as the rest of our comms, not like a regular car stereo. Anyway, I pulled off the service road around 9:15, give or take, parked just before the creek bed where the road gets too soft, threw the hazards on, got out, and started walking the line with my handheld scanner and a pair of binocs. It was quiet. No houses nearby, no animals, not even a tractor. Just heat and dry air and that faint hum you get off the lines when the current's high. I'd brought my thermos and a breakfast burrito from that gas station off Kimberly Road. I was halfway through the burrito when I looked up to check the catenary tension. That's when I saw it. There was something above the wires, about 30 feet up, dead center over the line. Oval shaped, shiny but not reflecting sunlight like a mirror, more like brushed metal. Not huge, maybe the size of a compact car. It didn't wobble or shift, it just hovered there, perfectly still, like it was bolted to the air. My first thought was drone, maybe surveying equipment or some kind of ag tech test. We get those sometimes from the university, but it didn't make a sound. No blades, no wind displacement. The air didn't move. I couldn't even hear the usual buzz from the wires anymore. I blinked, took a step forward to get a better look, and when I looked back up, it was gone. No movement, no fading away. 1 second it was there, next second just empty sky. Same pale blue, same dry heat. The hum from the lines was back, but quieter than before. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just scanning the sky, trying to make sense of it. I turned slowly in a circle. Nothing above, nothing behind. I checked my scanner, thinking maybe the line dropped or surged while that thing was up there, but it was reading normal. No dips, no spikes. I went back to the truck to call it in. The cab was warm, not baking, just stuffy. I keyed the mic and said, "Dispatch, this is truck 82. I've got a possible anomaly on the line. Might need a visual sweep from the air." No reply, just static. I waited, then tried again. 82 to base. Do you read? Same thing. Hissing static, not loud, but constant. No breaks. I tried switching to the backup channel, then the tertiary. Still static. I leaned back and stared at the radio for a second before turning the truck off and restarting the system. When it came back on, same deal. Static on every channel. I picked up my work phone to text another guy on the team. Dan, guy who covers the northern section. No signal, not even a bar. I checked the satellite GPS. It was still tracking, but the timestamp had frozen. It said 9:17 and just stayed there. I sat in the cab for a while, listening to the static. It wasn't the usual empty hiss you get when a channel's quiet. It had this texture to it. Every now and then there'd be a small bump or pop in the sound, like something trying to cut through. Not speech, just these little interruptions, like a pulse. I looked at my watch. It said 9:22. I kept waiting for it to click over to 9:23, but it didn't. I tapped the face, even pulled the crown to reset it. It was ticking, just not advancing. After about 10 minutes, or what felt like 10 minutes, the static cut out. Clean break. No fade, just gone. The radio switched back to its regular channel with that familiar chirp, and then the dispatcher's voice came through like nothing had happened. Truck 82 confirmed status on the south irrigation line. I keyed in fast. 82 here. Just had a system issue. Comms are back. They didn't mention anything out of the ordinary. I didn't either. I got out again, walked the line all the way to the substation, checked every pole, every connection. Everything was clean. No sag, no breaks, no residue or burn marks, no weird EM readings. Just normal. The burrito was still sitting on the dash when I got back. It looked a little grayer than I remembered. I drove back to the yard, logged my report, and skipped the part about the object. Just wrote temporary comms outage, likely environmental. That evening, I checked my watch again. It was working fine, but it still showed the date as the day before. I reset it manually. Didn't think much of it. Next morning, I got a call from Dan, the guy I'd tried to text. He said his truck radio had been acting up the day before, around the same time, even though he was out by Wendell, a good 30 miles away. He said he kept hearing this faint thumping through the static, like someone hitting a microphone, but couldn't raise anyone on any channel. He didn't ask if I'd heard the same thing, just said it like he was talking to himself. Later that week, I went back out to the same line to check for long-term stress. When I got to the spot, I noticed something new. One of the bolts on pole 14, the third one past the creek, had a clean, circular scorch mark around it, like a welding torch had traced it, but left no soot. Just a faint black ring about the size of a quarter. The metal wasn't melted, just discolored. I radioed it in, they sent someone to replace the hardware, and that was that. No one followed up. I didn't expect them to. We were driving through Nevada late one summer evening. Just me, my wife Emily, and our daughter, Sophie. We'd been on the road for hours, heading home to Tucson after visiting some family near Reno. The heat had started to fade as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the desert around us was turning from dusty red to deep purple. I was behind the wheel of our old Subaru Outback. Nothing fancy, but it's been reliable for years. Emily was in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone, and Sophie was in the back seat, half asleep with her headphones on. The radio was off, and the only sound was the hum of the engine and the tires on the pavement. We were somewhere just past Tonopah, driving on a stretch of highway that felt endless. The landscape was mostly flat, dotted with scrub and the occasional lonely cactus. The sky was mostly clear, a few stars starting to peek out, but a thin haze hung near the horizon. Out of nowhere, I saw this bright light flash across the edge of my windshield. It wasn't like a shooting star or a plane at first. It moved fast and erratically, darting low along the horizon. I blinked, thinking maybe it was a reflection or a trick of the eye. "Did you see that?" I asked Emily, who looked up from her phone and shrugged. "Maybe a drone or something," she said, though she didn't sound convinced. The light zipped across again, this time clearer. It was a steady, glowing orb, white, but not harsh like a car headlight or a flashlight. What caught me was how it moved. It darted straight across the horizon, then right in front of us, made a sharp 90-degree turn, and didn't slow down at all. It just zipped straight up and vanished behind the hills. I said, "That's got to be a jet or something, right? But I've never seen one turn that fast." Emily nodded, "Maybe some military thing. We're close to a couple of bases around here." Sophie finally took off her headphones and asked quietly, "Did you guys see that light?" It was really weird. I kept watching the horizon, half expecting the light to come back, but it didn't. The sky was darker now, and the stars were clearer. We kept driving, and I glanced down at the dashboard clock. It was showing 9:17 p.m., but then suddenly flickered and reset itself to 12 a.m. The numbers blinked a few times, then went completely dark. I frowned and tried the clock buttons, but it wouldn't come back on. Emily looked over and said, "That's weird." I shrugged it off, thinking maybe a glitch or a wiring problem. It was an old car, after all. I flipped on the dome light for a second, checked my phone for the time. It said 9:18 p.m., so the clock was definitely off. The weirdness stuck with me, though. We were alone on that highway, miles from any town or gas station. I felt a little unsettled, but didn't want to make a big deal out of it. The desert can play tricks on you at night. A few miles later, Sophie pointed out the window. "Look, over there." I looked where she was pointing and saw something else. At first, it looked like a cluster of small lights, but then they started moving together, hovering just above the desert floor. They shifted shape slowly, almost like they were floating in formation, then broke apart and disappeared behind a ridge. Emily said quietly, "That can't be drones or anything normal, right?" I wasn't sure. The desert's been used for all kinds of tests and experiments, and I knew there were areas restricted by the military. But it didn't feel right. We drove on. The highway stretched empty and quiet, and the strange lights didn't come back. That's when the dashboard clock flickered again. This time, it reset itself back to 9 p.m., like it had gone backward. I tapped it again, and the numbers vanished completely. Emily said maybe it's the heat or the wiring. We should just keep moving. I agreed, but something felt off. I started noticing little things. The road signs seemed older than I remembered. The desert looked different somehow, like the same stretch of highway, but a little out of place. The air smelled faintly like ozone or something electrical. Whiskey, our German shepherd back home, was on my mind. I kept picturing how he'd react if he were there with me. I felt a chill, even though the air was warm. About 10 minutes later, Emily said, "Did you just hear that?" I strained to listen. There was a low humming sound, not from the car, not from the highway, but something else, faint and pulsing, like a distant machine. I rolled down the window a bit. The sound grew just a little louder, but still soft and rhythmic, like a heartbeat or a fan running somewhere far off. Then everything went quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you notice every little noise. The tires on the road, my breathing, the wind brushing against the car. I looked up at the sky again. The stars were still there, but no lights, no movement. The highway stretched ahead, dark and empty. The clock stayed blank. We didn't talk much after that. Sophie leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes. Emily kept glancing around like she was waiting for something to happen. We made it to the next town, Beatty, and stopped for gas. The station was old, the lights flickering a bit, but everything looked normal. I checked my phone again. The time was correct and the battery was fine. Back on the road, the car's clock finally came back on. It was a little slow, maybe a minute behind my phone, but it worked. We got home around midnight and Whiskey was waiting by the door, wagging his tail. That night, I tried to make sense of what we saw. The light darting across the horizon, the sharp turn, the clock resetting twice, the humming noise. I searched online for military exercises or drone tests near Tonopah and Beatty, but nothing matched the timing or description. The whole trip felt like a glitch in time, or maybe something else watching us from the desert. I still drive that stretch sometimes, but I haven't seen anything like it again. The clock in the car? I replaced it, but it never quite felt right. I was out on the roof again that night, just like I often am when the sky is clear. The city was quiet, the kind of quiet that only happens after midnight on a weekday. I live in a small townhouse near Asheville, North Carolina, and my rooftop gives a decent view of the stars, better than most spots around here anyway. I usually bring my little speaker up, play some low music, and just watch. It helps me unwind after long shifts at the hospital. That night, it was cool but not cold, the kind of spring evening where you can wear a light jacket and still feel comfortable. I had my black lab, Pippa, with me. She's always calm on the roof, just lying down and watching the neighborhood with those half-lidded eyes, like she's half asleep but still keeping an eye on things. I was looking east, where the sky stretched wide and dark. At first, everything was normal, the usual bright stars and the faint glow of distant planes. But then I noticed something odd, a cluster of lights that didn't seem quite right. They were small, white, and arranged in a loose pattern, like a star cluster, but they were too bright and too steady to be stars. I thought maybe it was a plane formation at first, like those military flyovers I sometimes hear about. But these weren't moving like planes. The lights started to shift slowly, almost imperceptibly, but it was definitely motion. Instead of drifting across the sky like an airplane or satellite, they began to rotate, turning around an invisible center. It was a slow, deliberate spiral, almost hypnotic. I blinked a few times, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. Pippa lifted her head, her ears twitching. The rotation went on for a couple of minutes. The lights stayed in the same general area of the sky, but traced out this neat spiral pattern, turning as one. Then, one by one, they started to fade out. Not flicker or blink, but actually dimmed until they disappeared. The spiral shrank as the lights faded until the whole thing vanished. I remember feeling this weird mix of calm and confusion. It was so quiet up there, no sound from the lights, no jets or anything in the air, just that slow rotation and fading. I called out to Pippa softly, but she didn't move much. I wasn't sure what I'd just seen. I stayed on the roof for another half hour, hoping maybe the lights would come back or something else would happen. But nothing did, just the regular stars, steady and familiar. The next day, I mentioned it to my coworker, Nate, who's really into astronomy. He said maybe it was some kind of optical illusion or a satellite cluster, but even he admitted it sounded strange. I checked online, no reports of meteor showers or known satellite patterns that night. I thought maybe I was just tired or imagining it, but Pippa was restless that morning, more alert than usual, pacing by the door like she wanted to go out. I don't know if that means anything, but it stuck with me. A few nights later, I went back up to the roof around the same time. The sky was clear again, but I didn't see the lights. I kept watching until late, but everything looked normal. I've seen plenty of weird things at work and in life, but that slow spiral of lights just felt different. Like it was right there, just out of reach. Something real, but not quite explainable. I keep looking up now, especially on those quiet nights. Maybe I'll see it again, or maybe I won't. But that night on my rooftop with Pippa by my side, the stars didn't feel the same. I was going through some trail camera footage one evening after my shift. It was routine, checking for signs of wildlife activity, tracking deer movements, stuff like that. The cameras were set up along a popular hiking trail in the national park where I worked as a ranger. Nothing out of the ordinary, usually. But this time, something caught my eye. The camera had taken a series of photos at night, around 2:30 a.m. I'd seen footage from that area plenty of times before, mostly deer, raccoons, the occasional coyote. But this time, the images didn't look right. 3 consecutive shots were completely black. No animals, no light, nothing visible at all, just pure blackness. At first, I thought maybe the camera had malfunctioned or the memory card was damaged. I checked the timestamps. The first black photo was at 2:31:07 a.m., the second at 2:31:22, and the third at 2:31:37. So about 15 seconds apart, the same as usual, but all 3 were just solid black. That wasn't all. When I tried to play the audio recording that came with the photos, the sound file was corrupted. Every time it got to those moments, the audio filled with a series of loud, rhythmic clicks. Not like animal noises or static interference. These clicks were steady, almost like a pattern. I replayed the clip several times, trying to make sense of it. The clicks were consistent in a sequence. Click, 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 repeated over and over for about a minute. It was so regular it didn't sound random at all. But there was no other sound mixed in, no wind, no footsteps, nothing else. I thought maybe something had tampered with the camera or the memory card, but there was no sign of physical damage. The camera was still firmly attached to the tree branch where we'd installed it a month earlier. The batteries were fine too. I decided to head out there the next morning to check the spot in person. The trail was quiet, early spring, not many visitors yet. When I got to the exact location, the tree the camera was on looked normal. No scratches, no marks, nothing that suggested interference. The area around it was undisturbed, no footprints or broken branches that would suggest someone had been messing with the equipment. I felt a little uneasy standing there. The woods were thick, but the morning sun was filtering through the trees, making everything look calm. Still, that blackness in the photos and those clicks stuck with me. Over the next few days, I reviewed footage from other cameras nearby, trying to find anything strange. Nothing. Every other photo and sound file looked normal. Animals moving about, wind rustling leaves, distant bird calls. No more black images or weird clicks. Then, about a week later, I was back in the office when I got a call from one of the other rangers. He told me there'd been some strange reports from hikers on that same trail late at night. People said they heard weird noises, rhythmic tapping or clicking sounds coming from deep in the woods. No one had seen anything, just the noises. I didn't want to tell him about the camera footage just yet. I wasn't sure if it was connected or if someone was pulling his leg, but the timing was too close to ignore. That night, I decided to hike the trail myself, starting around midnight. I brought a flashlight, extra batteries, and my radio. The forest was quiet except for my footsteps on the dirt path and the occasional distant owl hoot. About halfway down the trail, I thought I heard something. At first, I wasn't sure, maybe the wind or branches scraping together. But then the sound came again, clear and steady. Click, 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 click. It was faint, coming from off the trail, somewhere near a cluster of tall pines. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried through the still air like a slow, patterned tapping. I stopped walking, turned off my flashlight, and listened. The clicks repeated, evenly spaced. I swung my beam around the trees, trying to find the source. Nothing visible. No animals. No people. The clicking stopped after a minute. I waited a little longer, but everything else was silent again. I didn't want to push further into the woods in the dark alone, so I turned back slowly, my heart picking up. As I walked, I felt like I was being watched. But whenever I glanced over my shoulder, there was nothing. The rest of the hike back to the ranger station was uneventful. I checked the radio. No signals or chatter except static. When I got back, I told the other rangers about the clicks. No one had any explanation. Some joked about woodpeckers or maybe some kind of animal behavior we hadn't seen before. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something else. The next day, I looked at the camera footage again. The 3 black photos were still on the memory card, surrounded by normal images. I zoomed in on the photos before and after. The one before showed a blurry shape near the edge of the frame, but it was too dark and out of focus to tell what it was. The one after the black shots was a normal night scene, empty trail, some branches, nothing unusual. I ran the audio through a basic spectrogram program, hoping to find some hidden pattern or frequency. The clicks showed as clear spikes at regular intervals, but nothing else unusual. I tried to get a specialist to analyze the sound, but nobody I contacted could identify it. They said it didn't match any known animal sounds or equipment interference. After a few weeks, I stopped getting reports from hikers, and the trail returned to normal. The clicks never happened again during my shifts, but sometimes when I'm reviewing footage late at night or walking those trails alone, I swear I can hear a faint clink in the distance. Not loud, just enough to make me turn my head. I've kept the camera and the footage stored away in my office. Every so often, I look at those 3 black photos and listen to that corrupted sound file, hoping to find a clue I missed. I don't know what caused it or what was out there that night. All I know is that for a few minutes in the middle of the night, something was there. Something that didn't show up on the images, but left a sound that didn't belong. I set up the trail cameras on a Saturday morning before heading out for a few hours in the woods behind my place. It's just some private land, nothing fancy, but I like checking for deer and other critters. I've had these cameras for a couple years, and usually they catch squirrels, rabbits, the occasional deer, sometimes a raccoon. Nothing weird. That day, I put one of the cams near this little clearing about a mile in. It's kind of a natural spot. No big trees right in the center, just grass and low bushes. I thought it might be a good place for animals to pass through or hang out. I left it there, went back to camp, and figured I'd check the pictures in a few days. When I finally got around to looking, I pulled the SD card out and popped it into my laptop. The first handful of photos were totally black, like no light at all. I thought maybe the battery died or the camera malfunctioned, but then I kept scrolling. Every single photo from the past 3 days was black. Not a single thing visible, no outlines, no shadows, nothing. I was confused. The camera worked fine before and after those days, no issue. And the timestamps were still going, showing pictures every 30 seconds or so, like it was triggering. Then I got to one picture from the second night. This one was different. It wasn't black. It showed the clearing. But instead of animals or trees, there were dozens of tiny points of light, hovering just above the ground, all over the clearing. The lights were small, like the size of a firefly or less, but there were so many, maybe 50 or 60, scattered across the frame. They didn't look like any normal animal eyes, no red eye reflection or anything, just dots of white light, glowing softly. Some were clustered together, others spaced out. They looked almost like stars fallen to Earth, but not bright enough to be anything obvious. I stared at that picture for a while. The camera's infrared flash must have been on, so I could see the shape of the clearing faintly, but there was no movement, no blur, just those tiny lights frozen in place. I kept scrolling through the next few images, and they were all black again. I figured maybe it was some glitch with the camera, but that didn't explain why every other picture was totally dark, and only that one showed those lights. I went back out the next night to check the clearing in person. I brought a flashlight and a headlamp just in case. I wanted to see if maybe the lights were something I could spot myself. The clearing looked normal. Grass, bushes, the usual. Nothing unusual on the ground, no footprints or disturbed leaves. I waited for a while, scanning the area with my flashlight, but saw nothing. The woods were quiet except for the occasional cricket or owl. As I was about to pack up, I noticed something off. The air felt heavier, colder than the rest of the forest around me. The usual sounds were still there, but fainter, like they were being muffled. It made me uneasy, like I was being watched. I shook it off and started walking back toward my truck. On the way, I thought I heard something moving behind me, like leaves rustling or twigs snapping. I stopped and spun around, but saw nothing except trees and shadows. I tried to tell myself it was just a deer or some animal passing through, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was, wasn't normal. That night, Back at home, I plugged the camera's card into my laptop again and started digging through the other photos from the surrounding cameras on the property. Some of those images had strange things, too. Dark shapes that didn't look quite like animals, shadows that didn't match anything I'd seen. One photo showed a blurry shape standing just beyond a tree line. It was too dark to tell what it was, but it was definitely not a deer or a person I recognized. The outline was too thin, and the limbs didn't move like a human's would. I kept scrolling through the pictures, feeling more and more unsettled. Then I noticed the timestamps around the time that photo was taken, about an hour before the photo with the lights in the clearing. When I compared them, I saw gaps in the timeline. There were blocks of time where no pictures were taken, even though the cameras were working. The missing times added up to about 20 minutes in total. I went back to the clearing photo and zoomed in. The lights didn't look like fireflies or insects. They seemed too steady and perfectly round. Some looked like they pulsed very faintly, but not blinking or flickering the way you'd expect. I showed the photos to a buddy of mine who's into hunting and cameras. He just laughed and said maybe the camera's sensor glitched, or it picked up some distant light reflections from a nearby house, but there's no houses close by. The nearest building is at least a mile away, and the clearing is surrounded by thick forest. I kept thinking about that night in the clearing, how the air felt off, how quiet everything was, and the feeling of being watched. I told myself maybe I was imagining things, or the woods just mess with your head sometimes. A few days later, I went back to check the cameras again, hoping to catch something more clear. When I looked at the new photos, I noticed the blackouts were back. Entire sequences of pictures showing nothing but total darkness, even though it was a clear night with moonlight. Then, in one of the pictures, I saw something faint, a blurry, almost transparent shape standing near the edge of the clearing. It wasn't a person or any animal I knew. It had a vague humanoid shape, but looked kind of distorted, like it was half there, or just out of focus. I stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out if it was some trick of the light or a camera glitch. I asked a local game warden about it. He told me cameras sometimes pick up strange things, bugs, moisture, even heat waves, but nothing like what I was describing. I didn't want to freak out, but I couldn't explain the pictures. That night, I stayed up late thinking about everything I'd seen. I checked the timestamps and photos again and again. The missing time, the black pictures, the floating lights, the blurry shapes. I kept wondering if I had been watched in the woods, if something had been there with me. I still go out hunting, and I keep the cameras running, but I haven't seen anything like those lights again. The clearing looks normal, the woods quiet as always. But sometimes when I look at those photos, I get that same feeling I had that night, like something unseen is just beyond the trees, watching, waiting, and I don't know what it is. It was a Thursday morning, early September. I remember that because we'd had a string of hot days and finally got a cool front that rolled in overnight. I got up around 6, same as always, made coffee, fed the dogs, and headed out to check the pasture before starting on the fencing repair I'd been putting off. We've got about 40 acres, mostly pasture, some woods near the south end, and it's just me and my wife out here. She was in town visiting her sister that week, so I was by myself. I noticed it right away, maybe 50 yards from the back gate. A square, perfectly square, burned into the grass. It was probably 10 feet by 10 feet. Sharp corners, straight lines. The grass inside it was brittle, dead-looking, not blackened or charred, just dry, like it had been microwaved. Outside the square, everything was normal, green, soft, dew-covered. But inside that square, it looked like mid-July after a month of no rain. I walked around it twice. No tracks, no tire marks, no footprints. I bent down and touched the grass. It crumbled under my fingers. Not ashes, just dead. And there was this smell, like ozone. Or static. I don't know how to describe it exactly, almost metallic. Not strong, but it lingered. I looked up. Clear sky. No sign of a storm. We hadn't had lightning. I would have heard it, and the dogs would have raised hell. I went back to the barn, grabbed a shovel, and tried to dig up a bit of the dirt from the middle. It came up dry, and we guessed but not scorched. No heat, no soot. Just dry soil, almost powdery. I figured maybe a crop duster dumped something by accident, but we don't get planes out here often, and there wasn't any residue or chemical smell, just that faint ozone scent. Later that day, I told my neighbor Joe about it. He's got land just west of ours, and he came by to look. He stood there a while, chewing on a toothpick, then asked if I'd been burning anything. I told him no. He kicked at the edge of the square with his boot, then shrugged and said it was probably kids with a drone and some kind of prank. But it wasn't just the square that got to me. That night, around 2 a.m., the dogs started whining. Not barking, whining. I got up, checked the back porch. They were both standing at the door, ears back, tails down. Usually they bark at anything that moves, raccoons, coyotes, wind. But they just stood there, quiet, eyes on the field. I stepped outside and listened. Nothing. No wind, no bugs, no distant trucks. Just silence, the kind that feels heavy. I didn't have a flashlight on me, but the moon was bright enough to see. I looked out toward the pasture. That square was still there, just darker now in the moonlight. Nothing moved. I waited maybe 5 minutes, then went back inside. The dogs followed and curled up under the kitchen table. Next morning, I checked again. Still there. Still dry. I brought a camera out and took a few pictures, but they didn't show much, just a brown square in the grass. Nothing weird unless you already knew what to look for. That day, I noticed something else. My phone battery died by noon. It was at 80% in the morning. I hadn't used it except to check the time and take those pictures. I plugged it in, but it charged slower than usual. The wall clock in the kitchen was 10 minutes off, too. Thought maybe the battery was low, but it was fine when I checked it. That night, I brought a lawn chair out to the edge of the pasture, just to see if anything happened. Around 10, I started seeing small lights, way off in the distance, moving low to the ground. Not headlights, no roads out that direction. Just pasture and woods. They weren't bright. Just little pulses, like someone flicking a lighter over and over. But they moved, side to side, up and down. Too smooth to be people walking with flashlights. No sound. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes before they faded. Dogs didn't bark. Whole time, they just sat at the fence, staring. 2 days later, the square was still there. The grass hadn't changed, still brittle, still dry, but the area around it started to look different. I don't know how to explain it, just a subtle shift. The grass outside the square grew faster than usual, greener, healthier, like the soil got a boost, but inside, it stayed dead. I brought out a moisture meter I use for the hay fields. Readings inside the square were low, almost zero. Just outside the square, normal, even a little higher than normal in some spots. That afternoon, while I was out walking the fence line, I heard a hum. Not loud. Low, almost like a diesel engine idling far off, but steady. I turned expecting to see a truck, but there was nothing. No dust trails, no headlights. I stood still for a minute, and the hum just stopped, like someone flipped a switch. When I got back to the barn, the power was out. Only for a few seconds, but it flicked off and on. The radio reset, the electric fence controller blinked like it had lost connection. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like someone was outside. I kept getting up, checking the windows. Nothing, but the dogs paced, back and forth. No barking, just pacing. Around 3 a.m., I looked out the bedroom window and saw the square glowing. Not bright, just a soft, faint shimmer, like heat rising off pavement again, but steadier. I went out onto the porch with my flashlight. When I shined it on the square, the shimmer stopped. Grass still looked the same. I walked out to it, slow. Dogs stayed back at the house. I crouched down, touched the dirt again. Still dry, but the air felt warmer over it. Not hot, just a few degrees different, like standing near a heating vent. I stayed there for a while, just listening. Again, nothing. No wind, no bugs, just quiet. Next morning, the shimmer was gone. No trace of it. But now the square looked cleaner, like something had sucked the moisture and color out completely. I left it alone after that. Stopped walking the dogs near it. Stopped talking about it. A week later, it rained. Good, steady rain all afternoon. Everywhere on the property got soaked, except that square. I went out after the storm passed and checked. The ground around it was muddy, grass wet, but inside the square, dry as ever. The grass still hasn't grown back. It's been months. Sometimes at night I still hear that hum, just for a few seconds, then gone. I don't go out when I hear it. Neither do the dogs. We just wait. Then it stops. I've never seen anything leave tracks. Nothing flies overhead, but that square is still out there, and it's not fading. It was mid-March, right around the tail end of my contract. I'd been working up near Tromsø, helping with some equipment maintenance at a weather outpost. The job wrapped early, and I had 3 days before my flight home. A buddy of mine who'd already flown back let me borrow his snowmobile and gear so I could get one last trip in. I figured I'd ride out to this little cabin we all used sometimes, tucked in way off the road, middle of nowhere. No service, no power, just silence and snow and sky. I left that morning around 10, skies totally clear, barely any wind. It was colder than usual, but not by much, maybe minus 15 degrees Celsius or so. Pretty normal for that time of year. I packed light, mostly just food, extra gas, and the usual emergency gear. The ride out was uneventful, took about 2.5 hours. I didn't see another person the whole way. The weird part didn't happen until later that afternoon. I was out on the lake behind the cabin, just doing lazy laps, messing around. That lake's big, maybe 3 or 4 kilometers across, and this time of year it's flat as a table, solid ice, completely untouched. No footprints, no tracks, just white all the way out to the tree line. It was around 4 when I noticed it, just a dark spot in the middle of all that white. From a distance it looked like a shadow, or like someone had spilled fuel or oil. I figured maybe it was a hole in the ice from a hunter or researcher. But when I got closer, it wasn't a hole at all. It was a circle. A perfect circle, probably 20 feet across, where all the snow and ice had melted down to bare ground. Not cracked or broken. Gone, like someone had peeled it off clean. There was steam rising from the edges, like it had just happened. And in the center, the ground wasn't muddy or frozen. It was dry, like summer dry. I parked maybe 30 feet from the edge and walked up to it, and I could feel the temperature change as I got closer. The air felt warmer near the edge, just slightly, like a heated bathroom after a shower. My goggles fogged a little. I didn't step into the circle. I just stood there looking at it. The line where the snow stopped was razor sharp, not melted gradually, just cut, like with a laser. There were no footprints, no tracks leading in or out. No animal signs either, which is unusual. Even in winter, you'll see fox trails or ptarmigan prints. There was nothing. I crouched and touched the edge where the snow ended. It was wet, and the ground underneath was warm. Not hot, just warm and noticed through my glove. I remember rubbing a little of the dirt between my fingers. It was almost sandy, which didn't make sense for where we were. That area was all hard-packed tundra under the ice. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, not really knowing what I was looking at. Then I heard something behind me, just a soft crack in the ice. Not loud, but sharp, like someone stepping on thin ice. I turned fast, thinking maybe someone else had come out there without me hearing their sled. But no one was there, just empty lake. I looked around for a while, walked a slow circle, checked behind my snowmobile. Nothing. No wind, no movement, no sound. I didn't hear that crack again. I backed off and got on the snowmobile. I was about to head back to the cabin, but something made me look back once more. I was maybe 50 feet out by then, and I saw, just for a second, what looked like a shimmer over the circle, like heat rising off pavement. It was faint and it didn't last, but I know I saw it. Back at the cabin, I tried to radio the main station just out of habit, but I couldn't get through. That wasn't unusual. Reception out there was crap anyway. Still, I felt uneasy in a way I couldn't explain. I stayed inside the rest of the night and didn't light the wood stove. Didn't want to make a signal, I guess. At around 1 in the morning, I stepped outside to use the bathroom and saw a single light way out over the lake. It wasn't moving, just hovering, maybe 30 or 40 feet off the ice, directly above where that circle had been. I stood there watching it for I don't know how long. It was red, not flashing, not bright, just solid and dull, like a brake light far away in fog. After a while, it just blinked out. Gone. No sound. Nothing left behind. I didn't sleep that night. When I went out the next morning, the circle was still there, but the ground inside it was frozen again. Not snowy, still bare, but the warmth was gone. No steam, no shimmer. The line around it had softened a little, like the snow had tried to creep back in. I left before noon. Didn't stop. Didn't eat. Rode straight back to the main road, then caught the train south a day early. I didn't tell anyone. Not really. I mentioned something to one of the other guys on the crew during the trip back to Oslo, just kind of joked about a weird hot spring or something, but he didn't ask questions. 2 months later, I tried to look it up, satellite images, weather anomalies, anything. There was nothing. No records of anything unusual in that area at all. I don't know what it was. I woke up standing in my backyard, barefoot on the cold grass, staring up at the sky. The first thing I noticed was a ringing in my ears, like when you've been at a concert or your headphones blast too loud. It wasn't loud, just this steady, high-pitched tone that seemed to fill my head. I blinked a few times, trying to get my bearings, but everything felt foggy, like I'd just been pulled out of a deep sleep. I didn't remember going outside. The last thing I could recall was being in bed, probably around midnight. I wasn't even fully sure what time it was now. The sky was dark, but there was this strange, muted glow overhead, like the whole neighborhood was under a thick haze. I looked down at my feet. They were wet and a little muddy, and the grass was damp with dew. I live in a suburban neighborhood, so it's not like I have a forest or anything out back, just a small patch of grass and a wooden fence. The air was cool and smelled faintly of rain, even though the forecast didn't call for any. I had no idea how I'd gotten out here. I checked my hands and clothes for cuts or scratches, thinking maybe I'd fallen or something, but there was nothing. My shirt was wrinkled and untucked, and my jeans had some dirt smudges, but no real damage. I didn't feel hurt or out of breath, just kind of blank. The ringing didn't stop. It was still there, this constant high tone inside my head, and I noticed my heartbeat was a little louder than normal. I stepped toward the back door, and the cold grass squished under my feet. Every step felt strange, like I was moving through a dream. I opened the door and stepped inside. The ringing started to fade the moment I crossed the threshold. It wasn't instant, but slow, like a volume knob turning down. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a second, trying to shake off the weird feeling. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hands were steady but felt strange, like they didn't quite belong to me. I tried to remember what happened before I ended up outside, but my mind was blank, like a blank screen. I checked my phone for the time. It was 2:37 a.m. I had no messages, no missed calls. The screen was dim, but I noticed something odd. The battery had dropped from around 60% when I went to bed to just 12% now. I was pretty sure I hadn't used it at all during the night. I sat down at the kitchen table and tried to focus. The ringing was gone, but I felt a lingering pressure behind my eyes. I thought about trying to go back to bed, but part of me was restless, like I needed to figure out what had just happened. I decided to check the backyard again, but this time with shoes and a flashlight. I wanted to see if there was anything out there that could explain the ringing or how I got out. Outside, the grass looked normal, except for a small circle near the fence where the dew was missing. The ground was dry there, even though the rest of the lawn was wet. It wasn't muddy or crushed, just dry and oddly clean, like someone had wiped it down. I scanned the sky with my flashlight, but there was nothing except a thick layer of fog or haze that blurred the streetlights in the distance. No stars, no moon. That's when I noticed it, a faint glow beyond the fence line, off in the woods behind the houses. It was pale and steady, not like a flashlight or a car. Just this soft, unmoving light that didn't flicker or change. I thought maybe it was a street lamp or a neighbor's porch light, but it felt too far away and too low to be any of those. And I knew every house around here pretty well. The ringing came back for a moment, just a faint buzz, but it stopped again as soon as I turned my head away from the light. I stood there for a few minutes, watching it, feeling this weird mix of calm and unease. I wanted to call someone, but I wasn't sure what I'd say. Eventually, I went back inside. The moment I stepped through the door, the light outside blinked off, disappearing as quietly as it had come. The next day, I asked my neighbor if they had seen anything weird last night, but they said no. Everything was normal. The yard looked fine, and nothing unusual was reported. I checked the backyard again during daylight. That dry patch was still there. It looked like a perfect circle, maybe 10 feet across, with the grass stiff and pale. I've sleptwalked a few times before, but never anything like this. Never out into the backyard in the middle of the night with no memory of moving, and definitely never with ringing in my ears or strange lights hovering just beyond the fence. I haven't told many people about it, mostly because I don't really understand what happened. It wasn't scary like a nightmare, but it wasn't normal either. Sometimes when it's quiet and I'm lying in bed, I can still hear that faint ringing for a moment, like a reminder that whatever was out there is still just beyond my reach. I woke up that morning because Rufus, my old lab, was pawing at the bedroom door, whining like something was wrong. I figured he probably needed to go out, so I got up, grabbed my slippers, and headed downstairs. It was early May in Vermont, still cool outside, but bright with that kind of fresh spring sunlight that feels new, even if you've seen it 100 times. I let Rufus out the back door first, and when I stepped onto the porch, I saw it right away. The garden. It's a small patch, mostly tomatoes, basil, a couple of pepper plants, and some sunflowers I've been growing just for the hell of it. Usually the plants are kind of scattered, facing all sorts of directions, just wherever they grew or turned naturally toward the sun. But that morning, every single one of them was turned the exact same way. They all leaned, almost unnaturally, like they'd been pushed or trained overnight, facing toward the woods behind the house. It was weird because I hadn't been out there after dark, and no one else lives close enough to mess with my garden. The fence is old but sturdy, and even if some animal had gone through, I don't see how it would cause the plants to line up like that. Rufus was sniffing around, clearly confused, but didn't bark or act scared. Just kept nosing the plants. I went around the garden, bending down to check the stems and leaves. Nothing looked broken or trampled. The soil was undisturbed. It was like the plants just turned. I thought maybe it was the wind. Sometimes storms will push plants over, but the night had been calm. No rain, no strong gusts, just that quiet kind of stillness you get before dawn. I shrugged it off, went inside to make coffee, still thinking about the plants. I spent the morning in and out of the yard, half expecting the plants to start turning back their way as the sun moved, but they stayed facing the woods. I called my friend Irene around noon, hoping she might have some rational explanation. She's a botanist and used to work at the university's greenhouse. I described it, and she said she'd never heard of plants just turning like that without some obvious cause, like light direction, damage, or a touch stimulus. I mean, they respond to light, right? Maybe the sun was reflecting weird off something, or there's a new growth hormone in the soil, she said, but even she sounded skeptical. That night, I stayed up late, watching from the kitchen window. Rufus was curled on the rug, half asleep. The moon was full and bright, casting long shadows through the backyard. Around 2 a.m., I saw something odd. A faint light flickered through the trees, a dull glow, not like a flashlight or car headlights. It hovered low, just above the treetops, barely visible behind the thick branches. It wasn't steady, more like a pulse or a shimmer. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, Rufus right behind me. The light disappeared before I could get close, but I noticed something else. The plants, again, seemed to lean a little more toward the woods, almost as if reacting to that glow. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the porch, watching, but nothing else happened. Over the next few days, I kept waking up to find the plants more and more aligned. The sunflowers had their big heads all facing the same direction, and even the tomato plants, which usually sprawl all over, seemed to be pointing as if they were looking for something I couldn't see. Rufus started acting weird too, sometimes growling low when he was outside, sometimes staring off into the woods like there was someone there. But every time I looked, it was just trees. I tried to ask the neighbors if they'd noticed anything strange, but no one seemed to care or had seen anything unusual. One afternoon, I was out in the garden when I noticed the soil looked different, near the edge closest to the woods. It was darker, almost damp, but the last rain was a week ago. I dug a little with my hands and found the dirt was loose, like someone or something had been digging around. I wasn't planning to stick around to investigate more, but Rufus was barking suddenly, ears flat, eyes locked on the tree line. I looked that way and caught a glimpse of something moving. A shadow, maybe, or a shape slipping between the trunks. I called Rufus and hurried inside. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from Irene. She said she'd been researching strange plant behavior, and something came up about plants responding to low-frequency electromagnetic fields. She wondered if something underground or nearby could be causing it. I didn't know what to think. The whole thing was just too strange. A few nights later, I woke up around 3 a.m. again and noticed the house lights flickering. The power cut out for a few seconds, then came back on. Rufus jumped up, alert as ever. When I looked out the window, the plants seemed to sway, even though the air was still. That's when I saw it. Again, just a flicker of light from the woods. This time it was closer, a pale blue-green glow moving slowly among the trees just beyond the fence line. I grabbed a flashlight and went out, Rufus growling and tugging at his leash. But as I stepped off the porch, the light vanished. The plants, though, they were all turned toward where the light had been, like they'd been watching. I spent the next week trying to document it, taking pictures, videos, notes, but the images never showed the light, only the plants. Eventually, the weirdness stopped. The plants slowly relaxed, turning back toward the sun, growing normally again. Rufus calmed down too. I don't know what was out there or why the garden acted like that, but every now and then when the wind is dead calm and the moon is bright, I catch myself staring at the trees, wondering if it's watching back. I'd been camping alone near Twin Pines Lake, out in northern Minnesota, just a couple miles off a logging road. It was late August, and the nights were already getting that crisp edge to them, even if the days still held the sun's heat. I picked the spot because it was quiet, away from the trails and the few cabins scattered around. Just the lake, the trees, and me. I set up my tent in a little clearing just a few feet from the water. There was this patch of soft dirt surrounded by pine needles and moss, perfect for staking the tent. My dog, Willow, a scruffy border collie mix with a white patch over one eye, was curled up at the tent's entrance, half asleep. We'd spent the afternoon hiking and fishing, and I was wiped out. I remember turning off my headlamp around 11 p.m. The lake was dead silent, except for the occasional splash of a fish or a frog croaking in the distance. Willow shifted a couple times, but stayed quiet. I was just about to drift off when I noticed something odd. There was this faint, rhythmic thumping sound coming from the woods across the lake. It wasn't loud, but it was definitely there, sort of like a slow, heavy heartbeat. It stopped after maybe a minute, and then the woods went quiet again. I figured it was probably a moose or some other animal moving around, so I didn't think much of it. I tried to ignore it and get back to sleep, but then I had this weird feeling, like I wasn't alone. Willow's ears perked up and she gave a low growl, staring out into the dark woods. I turned on my flashlight and scanned the tree line, but there was nothing, just shadows and black shapes. I settled back down, but the unease stuck with me. Eventually, I drifted off. When I woke up, it was just before dawn, around 5:30 a.m. The air was chilly, and the sky was this soft gray blue, heavy with fog rolling over the lake. Willow was gone from the tent entrance, which was strange because she never wandered off without me. I stepped outside, and that's when I saw it. Around the tent, pressed deep into the soft dirt, were these huge impressions. Not footprints, more like shallow pits, perfectly round, spaced out evenly in a pattern I couldn't explain. The holes looked like something heavy had hovered right above the ground and settled down with all its weight, but there was no sign of anything actually there. I knelt down and ran my fingers over one. The dirt was compacted and slightly cracked around the edges, like it had been pressed hard overnight. None of the pine needles or twigs were crushed or broken nearby, just the dirt, perfectly shaped into these strange marks. I looked around the clearing, but the only other footprints were mine and Willow's. No other tracks, no signs of animals, no branches broken or disturbed. The rest of the ground was untouched. I called for Willow, and after a moment, I heard her barking down near the water's edge. I rushed over and found her standing stiffly, staring out across the lake. She didn't come when I called. When I got close, she turned and ran back to the tent, but stayed close to my side after that. The whole area felt off. The usual forest smells were faint, and there was this strange silence, like everything was holding its breath. Later that morning, while I was packing up, I noticed something else. My GPS watch had lost time overnight. It showed that almost 2 hours had passed between when I'd last checked the time and when I woke up. I was sure I'd slept less than 4 hours, but the watch was off by almost two. I don't know if it was just a glitch, but I double checked the watch settings and battery. Everything was normal. I decided to pack up and get out early. Willow was still on edge, constantly scanning the woods and whining softly. On the drive back, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following us in the trees, but the road was empty. I've gone back to Twin Pines a few times since, but I haven't stayed overnight again. The impressions in the dirt still haunt me, and sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear that faint thumping sound in my own backyard. I was out in the Mojave Desert, just outside of Joshua Tree, setting up for what was supposed to be a straightforward, overnight time-lapse shoot. I'd been chasing shots like this for years, the kind where the Milky Way stretches across the sky, all clear and brilliant, with nothing but the desert around you. It was early September. The nights were just starting to cool down a bit after the summer heat, and the air was dry and still. I arrived just before sunset, hauling my gear: a tripod, a Canon 5D, a handful of lenses, and a portable power bank. My dog, Jasper, a lean Australian shepherd with sharp amber eyes, came along. I like taking him because he's calm at night, and it's nice not to be alone. We set up on a little ridge about half a mile from the nearest dirt road. The spot had a good view of the horizon and the dark sky, away from any light pollution. After a quick check, I positioned the camera to face north-northwest, where the stars would begin to move across the frame. I programmed the time-lapse to take a shot every 30 seconds, set the ISO and aperture, and let it run through the night. Jasper settled down near my camp chair with a blanket. I brought some water and snacks and figured I'd hang out, maybe get a little sleep, but mostly just watch the sky and listen to the desert. The night was quiet, way quieter than I expected. No wind, no distant trucks or planes. Jasper's ears perked up a few times, but he stayed lying down. I thought that was just the desert being desert. Around 1:30 a.m., I decided to check on the camera. The lens was cold to the touch, no dew, which was a relief. I double-checked the battery level. It was fine. While I was doing that, I noticed a faint dot of light on the horizon, just above the ridgeline, maybe a mile away. At first, I thought it was a car or some distant camper, but it was too small, like a pinpoint, almost like a star at first glance. The dot didn't move like a car, it shifted, but in a weird way. I focused my binoculars on it, and that's when it got strange. The light moved in sharp, deliberate patterns. Not smooth like a plane or a helicopter, but jerky and geometric. It traced triangles, then squares, then lines straight up and down. It was like watching a light show in slow motion. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks. Jasper suddenly stood up, ears forward, and started growling low and quietly. I looked around, but there was nothing else, just the black desert and stars. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward the ridge where the light was. The farther I went, the less I could hear the usual desert noises. No crickets, no rustling of bushes, not even the breeze that usually rustles the dry scrub. The silence was thick, almost like it was absorbing sound. The light kept moving, but it seemed to slow down, tracing the same shapes again and again. When I got to the top of the ridge, I could see it clearer. It wasn't bright like a flashlight or campfire. It was a cool white light, almost too steady. No blinking, no warmth. I waved the flashlight at it, thinking maybe it was some kind of prank or a drone, but the light didn't react. Then it started moving again, this time faster, zigzagging in patterns I couldn't follow easily. Then it just disappeared. Gone, like someone switched it off. I stood there for a few minutes, heart pounding, staring into the darkness. Jasper whimpered softly beside me. The desert noise returned slowly, the wind picking up, a distant coyote yipping. I walked back to my setup, still feeling off. When I got to the camera, I powered it off and checked the time-lapse photos. The early shots showed the usual star trails, the Milky Way glowing over the desert. But around 1:30 a.m., there it was, the pinpoint of light I'd seen. It appears on frame 114. tracing perfect geometric shapes across the horizon. Then it just vanishes between frames 134 and 135. The shapes are so precise they look almost computer generated. I zoomed in as much as I could, but the image was grainy at that distance. Still, the movement was clear. No blinking, no flashing, just steady, deliberate movement in patterns that didn't match anything natural. I scrolled through the rest of the images, but it never came back. Jasper refused to lie down after that. He stayed close, pacing and staring into the dark like he was waiting for something. I packed up as dawn approached, the sky starting to glow pale pink and orange behind the distant mountains. On the drive back, I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that light again. It never showed. Back home, I ran through the footage multiple times over the next few days. I showed it to a couple of friends who were into astronomy and photography, but no one had a good explanation. Satellites don't move like that. Drones don't follow such precise geometric patterns for that long and then just disappear. The whole thing left me feeling uneasy. It wasn't like a flash or a quick spark in the sky. It moved like it was alive, or maybe programmed, but it felt out of place, like something not meant to be there. I tried to ignore it, but every night since, Jasper has been restless. He stares at the windows or door, ears twitching like he's hearing something I can't. I've started checking the sky more often, hoping to catch that light again, but it hasn't come back. I still don't know what it was, but I know what I saw. I was flying a routine training mission out of Minden Regional Airport, late summer of 17. I'd just wrapped up my active duty a couple of years prior and took a gig with a small private flight school. Nothing fancy, mostly training new pilots on basic maneuvers and navigation. That evening was clear, no clouds, good visibility, and I was up in a Cessna 172, doing touch and goes with a student near the edge of the controlled airspace. At about 8:30 p.m., my radio crackled unexpectedly. It wasn't the usual chatter from approach or tower. This was a direct transmission with an unusual urgency. The voice was calm but firm. "Hawkins, this is ground control. You are ordered to investigate an unidentified aerial object approximately 20 miles northeast. Elevation unknown. Proceed immediately." I double-checked the frequency, thought it was a drill or a mistake. "Ground control. Copy that. Can you clarify the target?" No response. Just static. The tone was weirdly clipped, like someone who didn't want to waste words. I wasn't about to ignore an order, even a vague one. I told my student to circle back to the runway, then took off solo, climbing to about 7,000 feet, heading northeast as instructed. The sky was still bright with twilight, but the sun was dipping below the horizon. I switched on my radar scope. Nothing. Just the usual clutter and the faint blip of other small aircraft around the training area. I called ground control for updates, but the line was dead. No further info. About 10 minutes in, I noticed a faint glimmer off my left wingtip, just past the treetops far below. It didn't look like an airplane or a helicopter. No blinking navigation lights, no shape, just a pale, elongated light, almost like a stretched-out star. I banked left to get a better look. The light started to move, slow at first, just drifting through the darkening sky. Then it accelerated, fast. So fast it vanished from my sight in seconds. I checked the radar again. Nothing. No signal, no interference, nothing. I pulled the plane into a tighter turn, following the last known path of the light. Then the radio buzzed again, ground control's voice returning, this time calm but serious. "Object detected. Proceed with caution. Maintain visual contact if possible." I looked around, scanning the horizon. Suddenly, the light reappeared, but now it was a formation. 3 small lights, moving in perfect sync, about 300 feet apart. They changed direction abruptly, moving from a slow, deliberate eastward path to a sudden sharp left turn, something no normal aircraft could do. The acceleration was instant, without the gradual buildup you'd expect from any plane. I tried to keep up, but my little Cessna couldn't match the speed or agility. The objects disappeared in a blink, no contrails, no sound, no radar trace. The radio went silent again. I circled the area, searching desperately. Then the instruments started glitching. My altimeter jumped erratically. The compass spun briefly before settling. The GPS signal dropped out for a few seconds. I called for help, but the frequencies were dead or filled with static. I headed back toward Minden, unsettled. As I approached the airport, the control tower came back online, confused by my delayed return and odd altitude readings. After landing, I debriefed with the tower supervisor. No other aircraft reported seeing anything. Radar logs showed no unidentified contacts. Ground control denied issuing any orders. Later, I checked the radar logs myself. The entire event was a blank. No trace of the objects or the transmission. That night, I lay awake, trying to make sense of it. Was I chasing a drone? A weather balloon? Military test craft? Nothing matched what I saw. I kept thinking about those lights, their impossible moves, the silence, and the scrambled instruments. Whatever it was, it didn't behave like anything I knew. I still fly, but I haven't forgotten that night, and I'm not sure I ever will. I never thought much about talking about this. Hell, I kept it to myself for years. But it's been sitting with me, nagging at the edges, so here it goes. I'm Ed Harrow. I'm 68 now, retired radar operator, spent most of my career at a military base in Montana, watching the skies for anything out of the ordinary. Nothing fancy, just radar screens, dials, and long shifts staring at green blips. One night, back in '94, I was on the graveyard shift, 3 a.m. to 11 a.m., working alone in the radar room. The base was mostly quiet, just the usual static and some birds or planes passing through. Nothing that ever gave me a second thought. But then something came up that didn't make sense. Around 5:15 a.m., I noticed a blip on the radar far below the altitude range we usually track. I was used to seeing planes between 30,000 and 40,000 feet, commercial jets, military patrols, sometimes satellites when the gear was tuned right. This blip was at about 1,000 feet, hovering in the middle of nowhere. I figured it was a small aircraft or maybe a weather balloon. I kept watching it, expecting it to move or disappear. It didn't. Then, in less than 3 seconds, it rocketed straight up like a bullet, no curve, no slowing, past 70,000 feet. The thing vanished off the screen right around the edge of the radar's maximum range. I sat back, blinking. My heart was pounding. Nothing I'd ever seen moved like that. I tried to get a second opinion, but I was alone. I double-checked the equipment. Nothing wrong, no glitches. I logged the event in the usual way, then reported it up the chain. What happened next was what really made it strange. My supervisor called me in, calm but serious. He told me that I wasn't to mention the incident again. Not to anyone. No reports beyond the official logs. No questions. I asked why. He said it was classified and beyond my clearance. That was the first time I realized how little I knew about what was really going on. I kept the memory tucked away, didn't talk about it with my family or coworkers. You learn quick not to rock the boat in that line of work. But the weirdness didn't stop that night. About an hour later, I was outside for a smoke break. The sky was still dark, but starting to show hints of dawn. I noticed something odd, an almost imperceptible hum in the air, like a low-frequency vibration. It wasn't from the base or any machines. It felt unnatural. Then I saw a faint glow on the horizon, just above the tree line. It wasn't a star or an aircraft light. It was this pale, steady light, neither blinking nor moving fast. I watched it for a while. It didn't get brighter or dimmer, just stayed there, glowing softly. I tried to call the radar room, thinking maybe there was something new on the screens. The radio crackled, but no one answered. I went back inside. The radar showed nothing unusual. I shrugged it off as nerves, but the feeling lingered. Over the next few days, I kept catching glimpses of strange lights, sometimes hovering near the base, sometimes just off into the distance. They didn't move like planes. No sound, just there. Sometimes I'd hear the hum again, low and steady. I mentioned it once to a colleague. He laughed and said I'd been watching too many sci-fi movies. Then one night, I woke up suddenly. It was about 3 a.m., and the room was flooded with this dim bluish light. I looked out the window and saw a shape hovering just above the trees near the base. It wasn't like anything I could describe. A shape, maybe triangular, but the edges blurred and shifting. I blinked, and it was gone. I wasn't sure if I'd really seen it or if it was a dream. I didn't tell anyone. Years later, now that I'm retired and out of that world, I'm still not sure what I saw. The radar blip that shot straight up, The glowing lights, the hum, maybe some kind of new aircraft or secret tech, maybe something else. I've kept it to myself for so long because there was never a good way to explain it, but it's there. I tracked it. I know what I saw, and that's all I have.